So let me just say a few kind of introductory words. Then Carmen takes over. I think yesterday we did lay out a plan what to do to become a generative AI specialist in localization, and also how to do it. But today and tomorrow we'll be digging in the subject matter much deeper. We start with a workshop by Gema and Mariya on the metrics. It's I think, the most difficult but also important subject matter that we should dig in with the fresh mind. Then there is a hands-on annotation labeling workshop after 2 hours, and then kind of a provocative speech by Craig. Tomorrow we'll have also some presentations and a long workshop on prompt engineering. Has anyone been to a prompt engineering workshops that we've organized in the past? Maybe you can raise your hands if you have been. Some people have been. All right, so cool. Many people have not, so it will be new for you. Cool. Those who have been, then you guide everybody else, right? You help them. You help them learn. So again, the structure is difficult matter in the beginning, then middle hands-on workshop interactive that everybody can participate, and then some lighter materials at the end. That's how we see this kind of workshops going. 3-4 hours per day. That's the maximum a person can sit in front of a computer on Zoom without getting completely burned out. So let's see how the endurance holds over this time. And the moderator one will not be me. Today, your moderator is charming Carmen. Carmen and I work together. Then Carmen worked in the European Commission at Apple. And now she's into the academic studies. She is now working on a thesis on how translation helps in crisis. Carmen, how's that going? I know your thesis is hot.
Yeah, it's on crisis translation, and I'm doing basically evaluation of LLMs. How do they perform on crisis translation task in the humanitarian sector? And I'm doing some experiments here in this year, so that's why I was here for 3 months. And now I'm going back to Naples and work on it, and maybe write a paper. Yeah, let's see, and present at conferences. I'll be presenting also in Machine Translation Summit in Geneva, like some initial investigation that I did. And yeah, so surprisingly, ChatGPT performed better than Google Translate on this crisis translation task for Italian into English combination.
So if you get crushed by a fallen rock, or if it's a tsunami, call ChatGPT, right?
Yeah, it seems more reliable, yeah, according to my annotators.
Um, Before I leave into the black screen and Carmen complete takes over, the format of these workshops is interactive. So feel free to open up your microphone camera or close them if you don't feel comfortable. Interact with the presenters so that it's not a monologue or a how do you call it, a dialogue with only two people are speaking. Let's make a polylogue when
Yeah.
many people are speaking. Good luck. The material is important. It's has some of this foundation that people who are just vibe coding or just chat GPT in their way through do not know. So this will give you strong foundation and also give you some directions what to study next. So when you say computational linguist, a lot goes into computational linguistics, and hopefully we help in that trajectory. Many of you are knowledgeable, and you already know a lot of the material. Feel free to contribute, bring up the discussion on a higher technical level. It's always better to have the discussion a little bit above what you currently know, so that you can learn and catch up with the process. So good luck, and Carmen, take it from here. Very excited, and for the first time, not the moderator. It's so cool.
Yeah, after so many years. Last time was in 2021, if you remember, one of our first workshops.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Like, good evening, good morning. I don't know where you're connected. So, we are all here to the model evaluation workshop, which is part of our ongoing conversation around innovation and quality in localization and AI. And I'm very excited to be your moderator for this afternoon. So we got a powerful lineup of speakers and hands-on sessions ahead of us. So all these workshops are focused on one essential question: how do we meaningfully evaluate GenAI systems in localization workflows? So we'll begin with a deep dive session from Gema Ramirez-Sanchez, who's the CEO of Prompt Language Engineering, and Mariya Shmatova, Director of Reasoning and Evaluation at Toloka AI. And they will walk us through GenAI evaluation for localization managers. So they will be covering key topics like performance metrics, available frameworks, and real-world use cases. So let me welcome to the stage Gema and Mariya.
All right. Hello, everyone. Hello from Spain. It's siesta time here, but I think that siesta is something from the past already. I got the opportunity at this time of the year, at least.
Yeah.
I'm gonna share my screen. Okay. Hopefully it will go well. So you should be seeing the presentation that we prepared for this session. Full screen right now. Is that okay? Oh my God. All right.
Looks good.
Looks
Use the
good.
microphones, please. I know my microphone is the worst, but you guys have better microphones.
Okay. So here we are. I don't want this to go by its own. I don't know what's going on. Okay. I'm here with Mariya Shmatova. We have carefully prepared this session to walk you through GenAI evaluation for localization managers. But as Constantine said, feel free to interrupt because with your interventions, it will be much better for sure. Maybe just a couple of words, a few words about ourselves. Yay, that's better. So still that I cannot see you on my screen and I want to see you on the slides. So I'm like new to this. That's better. I don't know where to put this, and if you are seeing it. Okay, so I'm Gema Ramirez. I'm the CEO of Prompt. As Olga was saying yesterday, we've been for years in the field delivering machine translation, curating data, and recently also being part of the team that is developing foundation LLMs inside one of the initiatives that is going on in Europe called Open Euro LLM. Evaluation has been part of the equation in all of the three areas that I highlighted for you today, whether it was translation of evaluation of NT models or data, or recently how to evaluate LLMs that are starting to be developed from scratch. Evaluation is a key component. And now I will give the floor to Mariya so that she can say a few words about Toloka.
Hi, my name is Mariya Shmatova. I'm working at Toloka as director for evaluations and reasoning. Previously, I had long story with translation industry. I worked for machine translation and for other NLP analytics and quality evaluation areas. And I'm also co-organizing a general machine translation workshop at WMT. WMT turns 20 years this year, and Toloka provides data for training and evaluation for GenAI models. We are blending human experience with technological advantages. And we have 10 plus years of experience in different areas of data annotation, generation, and verification. And we have worked with 40 plus languages all over the world. And we are pretty well informed about evaluations for different languages and multilingual LLMs. Gema?
Brilliant. So now the outline of the workshop. So we are going to go through a brief intro to GenAI Eval, and then we will dive into benchmarks, metrics, and frameworks, some use cases, and questions. So there are questions that we will answer on your side, but we have also prepared questions for you. We will do a short break so that people can breathe and maybe take a little bit more coffee. But for the time being, let's start with a brief intro to GenAI Eval. And Mariya.
Yes, I have already mentioned something yesterday during the panel talk, but I'll repeat and go a bit deeper. So why do we need new evaluation approach to GenAI comparing to a standard classical machine translation, neural MT, previously StatMT, and so on? The main thing is that GenAI is not non-determined, non-deterministic, so we have to deal with output variability and have to check multiple times if everything is okay. Also, GenAI models have broader context sensitivity, so sentence by sentence or even paragraph by paragraph evaluation is not enough for now. It can work for some cases, but we need to look broader. Also, we should mind hallucinations. I guess anyone who worked with LLMs is familiar with this, especially for non-English, non-very popular languages. When a model starts hallucinating just because it doesn't know some tokens, some words, and so on. Also, we should mind task specificity because translation is now not only just translation, but translation and adaptation, translation and summarization, translation and filling out some nuances and so on. So there are a lot of joint tasks we should mind and we should evaluate actually. The last but not least, we need a multidimensional quality. Basic features like fluency, accuracy, adequacy we used previously are not enough. We need to go multidimensional and we need to find out new criteria tailored to new tasks to evaluate and to look through. Next slide, please.
So all of this looks very complex, but should we just invent everything from scratch, or did we learn things in the past that are transferable to GenAI evaluation? So coming from strong background from NT, we try to put things on a diagram in which we can see some of the things that we were doing in the past refreshed with the complex world of evaluating GenAI that Mariya just depicted. But at the end of the day, we are evaluating for the real world. So what we want to see if our purpose, so what we want this machine to output given an input, is exactly what we are looking for. So it was basically what we were doing in the past with machine translation. We wanted to evaluate machine translation. We had an input that we were given to a machine translation component. Today, this is much more complex because when we want to call one of these components, we need to use a prompt. The prompt can be as complex as it's needed. And the LLM component, it's a bigger black box than MT used to be, but we get an output out of it probably is not exactly the same. This output gets post-processed many times until we see the real output. And in the end, we have an output and we want to evaluate it. So what we need is to define a purpose, and in the real world, this is something that it's not easy. And if we had to do evaluation for every single cycle of calling this system, let's say, it would be very expensive. After we have the evaluation, ideally, we should have an indicator or metric, because judgment should be the last thing we should rely on, because with metrics, then we can keep seeing if something has improved or not in the future. So now, let's say we can do human evaluation for every single case in which we call an LLM. What do? We use benchmarks as a proxy, but we were also doing this in the past. We had our source sentences, our target, and our references, and we were putting them into automated evaluation or human evaluation, and we were computing some metrics, indicators, that were giving us some feedback about maybe the real world. They were never perfect, they won't be perfect, but today we have kind of the same, although these benchmarks are now made out of prompts and reference outputs, which should ideally be representative of the task that we want to accomplish, but they are slightly more complicated. But ultimately, evaluating GenAI, as in the past, evaluating MT, it's all about selecting or creating, we will talk about that, an appropriate benchmark, and selecting or creating a metric or a bunch of metrics to track task-based indicators of performance. This is what we want. Is this too naive? Maybe. Nobody said perfect nor easy, because there are multiple factors, as Mariya showed, that influence today's ways of evaluating, intrinsical and extrinsically. For example, input and output token cost, speed, latency, many things that are also involved, and not only performance are there to evaluate. So we have a new monster and we want to get used to it, maybe by interacting with it in a, let's say, simple way at the beginning. Then we can go more complex. So our advice is to go from experimentation and what's your gut feeling, and evolving into fully customized GenAI formal evaluation, but don't start with selecting a complex framework or a model and sticking to it. And from components that you can define perfectly to your purposes to full workflows. So let's start simple. I think that this is it for the first part. So I'm not sure if there's anything, any comments up to this point, or we should dive directly into, okay, benchmarks and metrics. What do we do?
Okay.
I see that there's somebody with their hand raised. I'm not sure if they did that intentionally.
I think that this is since the beginning when.
Oh, okay. Then
Yeah.
then maybe it was okay.
Okay. So
Okay.
yeah, please.
Yeah, thank you. So as Gema mentioned, we need benchmarks to deal with our new monster in the room. And why do we need them? It's because we need to evaluate the quality on some standard sets. And what benchmarks do we use? We can use either public benchmarks or internal benchmarks. Public benchmarks are publicly available. Everybody uses them. Everybody reports their quality using these public benchmarks. They are easy accessible without additional work. And also they are usually general and cover broad use cases. Sometimes there are open benchmarks by some small research teams for some cases, but they are usually not so widely available, and you can't find them like just going to Hugging Face and seeing the most popular leaderboard and so on. And they are also very good for comparison with competitors. So you can see anyone using these benchmarks. So you can just evaluate your model in this benchmark and see how good it is compared to, for example, GPT-4o or Gemini or whatever it is. And why then do we need internal benchmarks if we have publicly available benchmarks used by industry leaders, so being not very bad actually. But sometimes we need internal benchmarks to challenge particularly our models for the criteria and for the topics we want them to be the best, and they want them to be to work cool. And this is also a very good thing to have your internal benchmarks you can fully rely on. But this requires additional work, and since you can do it for specific use cases, you also can do internal benchmarks for general use cases, just being aware that nothing leaks out of this benchmark, just being aware that you rely on this benchmark, and you don't use it usually for comparison, but you use it for iterating your model between for reiterating your model and for finding out what's worse and what should you work on. So version to version comparison. I also see one question in the chat. Where do we find public benchmarks? Could you provide some names? Yes, I'll provide some names a bit later in this last section when we talk about how benchmarks fit to localization, to languages, and so on. The links will be also provided when you receive the presentation. Hema, maybe next slide, please. Yeah, so benchmarks could be of different types depending on their structure. The most easy and the most popular benchmarks are golden answer benchmarks. Here are also some links, yes. So golden answer benchmarks are usually contain a question, a prompt, single correct answer, golden answer, and used for a single correct answer assessment. They usually measure factual quality and accuracy, and are also easy to create and to use because it's what we have traditional done for MT, for example, just one sentence translation, which is golden standard, and then using evaluation metrics. But we have some contrast actually. It doesn't capture valid alternative responses. And since we have non-deterministic responses in LLMs, it is even it's even less it provides even worse quality than for normal neural machine translation, because we compare with only one reference, and all the other references, even they are valid, they could be charged as non-valid. So we will have very biased evaluation. But still, these benchmarks could work, especially with LLM as a judge. We will talk about it later. And the next type is multiple choice benchmarks. We have some factual question. We have some predefined options, just like in school tests. And the model is asked to choose to select the valid option. And it's also tests factual knowledge and also reasoning capability capabilities if the question if you need reasoning to get the right answer to the question. The main pro here is that it's easy to score automatically. And the contra here is that the scenario of multiple choice is really very artificial. The only thing when a normal person use this scenario is when they ask ChatGPT to solve their school exams or quizzes or something like this. So it's not quite a natural scenario. Next slide, please.
Sorry, there are two questions in the chat.
Yeah.
So if you
Yeah.
can give example of version to version comparison, and if you recommend using both these benchmarks.
Yes, example of version-to-version comparison. It's just a method when you evaluate one version of your model on the benchmark. Then you fine-tune your model and evaluate it once more on the same benchmark and can compare your scores. So you are comparing not against competitors, but you are your own competitor. Just like in psychology, you are your own metric. Do I recommend using both? Yes, I recommend using both for different purposes. As I have said, you can use common benchmarks to be compared with other major models, not to run them on other models, because usually producers of big industrial models use these benchmarks and report these benchmarks, and you already have predefined scores. And you can also run your model on this benchmark and then compare against what you have reported. Any other questions by now?
No, I think we're fine.
Okay, so let me continue. On types of benchmarks, there are two more complex types. One type is a rubric-based benchmark. It is used for criteria-based assessment. It measures the responses compliance with predefined criteria. So we have not a golden answer, not a predefined answer, but a list of criteria written by expert where we can find what should be the ideal answer. For example, if it should contain some words, or if it should contain some information, or if some information should be avoided, and all of this. And we can use this benchmark with LLM as a judge, and it's even better than a golden answer benchmark because we avoid part of biases. So the pros is that it provides a multidimensional assessment against all the criteria we can list. And a contra is that it's time consuming and expensive to create such benchmarks. You need experts in your area, and you need a thorough work and quality control, etc., to have a really good working benchmark. But if you have it, and if you can avoid leakages, you can use it multiple times, and you can do this version-to-version comparison for your model multiple times, and it would be much better than easy benchmarks. And the last type is task completion benchmarks. Task completion benchmarks are mainly used for agents, not for just LLMs. It's about completing specific tasks. and this benchmarks measure functional correctness rather than style. So it's more like unit tests in coding, if you know. Just like has the LLM, the agent, the system done this task, completed this task. It tests end-to-end functionality rather than isolated capabilities, and it's difficult to create comprehensive task sets covering all the capabilities. For example, people who created agentic benchmark Gaia, they reported that they should have selected very carefully all these tasks to make it good, not for human reasoning and human action. We are using every day, but for how LLM acts and reasons. So it's a bit next level. Next, please. Yes, and to create benchmark, which is normally the data set consisted of data points, you can use different sampling methods, and there are 4 which are widely used. First is random sampling. Random sampling is the gold standard for statistical validity. If you have some flow of your queries, for example, search queries, translation queries, any queries you have, you just random sample this flow and get a representative benchmark, and then write golden answers or make criteria or whatever you want. But it is, since it, although it's the gold standard for statistical validity, it's sometimes rare but important cases may be undersampled because they are rare and they can't be found just with random sampling. So it's okay for if you want to measure general quality, but it's not very good if you want to take some insights or go through some complex cases for a system. Then you need to use another sampling. For example, stratified sampling. Stratified sampling is done by sampling from every straight of your flow. So you just break your flow under some criteria for straights. For example, for search queries, there are popular, less popular, and far less popular queries. And from every straight, you sample randomly some sort of data points. But it limits random sampling by this window you use. And also you can get representations across all important categories you selected for your sampling. So if you selected this frequency, you will have more frequent and less frequent queries represented in your benchmark. But predefined struts need to be comprehensive and relevant, so you need to think very thorough on what you want to use as struts. So would it be frequency? Would it be length? Would it be some topic structure or whatever? So it is also based on your particular task. The most popular for now is adversarial sampling. It's always good for real model weaknesses and challenging sets. It's when you know already what your model is good on or is bad on, you just sample the queries of such type. And make a benchmark. So you don't sample anything you don't need. And it's not about struts, but about what you know about features of your model. But it may be unrepresentative of a typical usage and can contain artificial difficulty. And also the last type is convenience sampling. It's the most easy thing. It's just use all available data. You just have not so much data for some For example, you don't have any flow. Your model is on early development stage. You don't have any history, and you need to go with some benchmark. You find some available data and use it, and then refine it, and then use it again. But this approach could lead to significant biases, but sometimes it's the only thing you can use. Yeah, I see a question about leakages in the chat, but it's exactly what Gema covers next.
Yeah, I answered to that. So from this, we are going to cover in the next slides what are the main warnings about benchmarks, about the ones that we find out there and our own, because there might be problematic also when we create them. We just categorize them in 6 different, let's say, different types of warnings. And I'm going to start with one that relates a lot to the localization industry, which is, let's be aware of linguistic and cultural aspects. And I was taking a look to one of the benchmarks that Mariya was mentioning before, MMLU, for example. This benchmark was created in English and translated into multiple languages. It's widely used, it's openly available everywhere, and it's one of the most popular benchmarks. If you take a look to those dashboards or leaderboards that people show to see if my model is better than another model. Okay, I'm a person, so I'm particularly interested in STEM topics, and I was just looking at one of them because we are preparing right now an evaluation for Iberian languages, so Spanish is one of them. And I was surprised to see, for example, this item on astronomy, which basically has a question and 2 options as answers, right? The question in Spanish says, if we travel towards north from the United States to Canada, we will see that Polaris, so the North Star, is, and you have as an option more brilliant, B, fainter, C, higher in the sky, D, lower in the sky. And if you take a look to the rest of things that goes with this benchmark, I don't want to do this, cancel. I was surprised that things like, oh, this is typically for a region, so North America, country, there was a degree of cultural sensitivity along with it. And I was saying, oh, okay, this is the right thing to do, because if I was to use this to, for example, query an LLM that it's very biased towards Spanish in Spain, I would probably not use this one because maybe my children here are still not geographically educated and they prefer another type of questions and so on. By the way, yeah, the correct answer was C. But what's the problem? The problem is that if you take a closer look to the linguistic and cultural aspects of MMLU, you easily discover things like that. There's a mistake. Nobody says abaja in Spanish. That's a spelling mistake, first of all. Does it influence in the results? So I would say maybe LLMs are robust enough, but maybe not. And I don't want a benchmark that is widely used to contain errors. So linguists wanted to review this. And what is more problematic from my point of view So, for example, the reference to Polaris in here wouldn't work. For us, Estrella Polar is enough, and I would never write it with a capital letter. And actually, there's these things are spread in all languages. You may find this kind of issues that become with as a natural because of the way those benchmarks were created. So this is, if you are very, very, very interested in specifics about linguistic and cultural aspects, we'd better review the benchmarks that we use. So for example, if you take a look to the same benchmark in Portuguese, you find this that this is very biased toward Brazilian Portuguese. In the answer, we could be much more problematic than the questions, because then you need to match the exact answers. And you find these things about capital letters and lowercase and things that are unnatural, like naming the number of stars in a constellation by 7.0, which is a natural language. So if this benchmark represents language, then this is a big warning. What else? Human or synthetic? This is something we need to pay attention to, because some of the benchmarks out there have been synthetically produced by GenAI. So what's the problem? They are valid when human benchmarks are not possible, but be aware that they are not as effective as human benchmarks, especially for complex tasks. This has been the case of study of this paper that it's linked, efficacy of synthetic data as a benchmark. And most of those are created with LLMs. So it's not only that they've been, for example, machine translated. So they've been synthetically produced by LLMs. And there's evidence about producing them with a bigger or smaller model. So if you need to produce a synthetic benchmark, make sure that you use a good LLM. Otherwise, it will impact on the results that you want to measure. So we always prefer human, but the thing is that it's not always possible. But just a warning that they are less effective than human, because humans know better how to challenge LLMs than LLMs themselves. Another warning is that everything, or the most suited, the bulk of the available benchmarks are in English, and the proxy that everyone is using is translation, machine translation, and maybe post-editing. So the performance has also shown to be very different on natively created benchmarks than on translated ones, no matter how this translation was done. My colleagues here took this MMLU benchmark, so the same one in which we saw that there were problems in Spanish. They took it and they translated it from English into Spanish, and they saw that simply by doing that, you induce errors in the LLM answers, which distort the benchmark results. So the nature of the benchmark should also be something that we need to pay attention to. So this is usually in the tables that we are compiling to see what benchmarks to use, for example, inside LLM development. All of this is carefully taken into account, and we are redoing the benchmarks and correcting them. Indeed, there's an initiative called MMLU PRO that said, enough of using this benchmark, let's mend it and let's extend it with good quality prompts and so questions and answers. And so this is another thing that we may want to take a closer look to. Okay. Then another example of that, not only in MMLU, but in something which is becoming a very big use case, which is health. There was this study already entitled Better to Ask in English, the cross-lingual evaluation of large language models for healthcare queries. They were doing an interesting experiment in which they were translating from English into major languages like Spanish, Chinese, and Hindi. And then they were checking 3 different things in English and in the other languages. They were checking for correctness, so the quality of the answers provided by the LLM in the different languages. And they saw a drop of 80% in comprehensive answers among non-English languages. 18%, it's a huge amount of decrease. Consistency, which is very worrying. If you ask more than once, will you have the very same answer? So Mariya was saying that LLMs are non-deterministic. So this is also what happens. Similarity among LLM answers in non-English languages were 29% less consistent. So this is also a huge problem. And then they were also checking for something called verifiability. So this is has nothing to do with the metrics that we are used to. This is something else. This is what Mariya was saying. We need other type of indicators and multidimensional to assess that these systems are doing exactly what we want. In health domain, we cannot afford to have a drop of 13% in the capacity to authenticate the validity of claims or in the consistency of answers. So this is another warning for benchmarks paired with LLM validation. Something which was a recent discovery by the group in which we are participating was that we need to change. Oh, which LLM were, yeah, it's in the paper, it's linked from, so there's this question about which LLM was used for the healthcare study. It's in the paper, which is linked from the presentation, so we will share the details. So we recently discovered that we should switch from single to multi-prompt benchmarking everywhere, even for well-developed models, because prompt variations may lead to very different results. So we are right now making a task force to get the available benchmarks, which usually have 1, 2, maybe 2 prompts. Some of them have up to 5, and making further, so variations of the prompts and evaluating the performance. And we got very shocking results just by not putting answer in at the end of the prompt and making very, very, very simple variations, like not putting the correct answers among brackets. Well, this is things that happen because LLMs are, again, non-deterministic, and they are very sensitive to the prompts. So, for example, from these 3 variations, if we had not variated the prompts, we would have a completely different picture on the performance of multiple different benchmarks that we were evaluating. So that's a tip. Let's use multi-prompt benchmarking. So maybe we need to enhance what we have already in place, because this is a big, big deal. And the last one, which is about leakage or benchmark leakage. So probably we would generally agree, although we are probably making a debate, can make a debate out of this, that LLMs should not train on benchmark. But actually, what if they do? So this is what we don't know for most of the LLMs that are out there. Some of them declare, or some of them don't. So all that we can do is to see if we can check the training data and see if those benchmarks that we are using for evaluation were included or not. This is usually the place to put it is the model data cards or papers that are published, but usually these are not available for private LLMs. So let's blame the developers and let's ask them to apply data decontamination in the next round of training. But this is becoming more and more and more difficult because this needs to be done at the very, very beginning when you are pre-training. Also during post-training, so when you are instructing the model to complete some tasks, but it may be too late. So Laura, maybe a clarification. Does this mean that the prompt needs to adapt to the LLM? What I mean is that depending on which LLM is tested, the prompt needs to have one format or other. It means that you cannot test with a single prompt, that you is not adapting to the LLM. Is that if you want to have the full picture, you need to query with different prompts, the same LLM or different LLMs. Otherwise, you will have a biased view of what is going on. And if one day you have this variation because someone, I don't know, removes the end of the prompt and changes it to something different, your evaluation may change. So your evaluation results may change. So to have a more robust view of the whole results, it's better to have multi-prompting everywhere. Different LLMs do react differently to the same prompt, of course. Yes, that's true. They are, so during the training, they see a lot of template-based prompts, but we don't prompt them all the time with templates. We prompt them when we create benchmarks. We tend to prompt them in natural language, let's say, not in template language. Some of these templates sound very unnatural, actually. So if you discover the template that was used during instruction, you may have more security. So, but variating the prompt will give you some surprises, actually. So we were talking about leakages. So data might be contaminated. Let's blame the developers. What we can do also is to check the LLM itself. So there are right now people looking into how to automatically detect contaminated parts of benchmarks and which parts of the benchmarks have been probably leaked into training verbatim. That means people have trained on exactly the benchmarks that you are using for evaluation. And then if we manage to identify these parts, we can remove the contaminated parts from the benchmark and repeat evaluation. Yeah. So this is something that it's a big problem. This is one of the works that was looking into benchmark leakage in large language models. Their approach was based in simple concepts like n-grams. So they were asking the models and providing from a narrow window to a broader window of 5 words or 5 grams, the answer, and seeing if the LLMs could complete the rest of the answer. And then they were checking if the answer was in those 5 grams exactly as it was in the benchmark, right? So you can see if there's exactly the same answer. That's very suspicious. They were doing it on the benchmark itself and on a paraphrased version of the benchmark, so that they could compare also if this overlap on n-grams or a series of 5 consecutive words was the same, so they would have a little bit more evidence. And they were doing the very same thing also on perplexity. So how much the completion of the answer, so how much surprise it created. That's what perplexity measures. And they have very interesting results for one of the benchmarks that we were mentioning before, GCM8K and math. For example, they detected with the 5 grams or perplexity that there was a high possibility that Aquila, which is one of the models they benchmarked or they evaluated, could have trained on exactly that benchmark. They were providing this evaluation for many models. And in here, that's a tweet about updating for Quen, for which they observed that actually there was high possibilities of this model being trained on both GCM8K and math. If you go and check what Aquila says in their papers, kudos to them. They actually acknowledge that they had a problem that was accidentally, and they say we had a data leakage problem with GCM8 test on data in pre-training task dataset. So they were not including this dataset in their own evaluation, but for the rest, we don't know. Okay, I think I have a raised hand. Silvio, please.
Yes, it's from me. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. No, it looks like a lot of trouble to detect if the data is or is not in the training data. Can people just create original data for the benchmark? Is that an option? You write something that was never written before, off you go. You know that's not in the training. Is that
Yes.
possible?
It is possible, of course,
Okay.
and it is the way to go, actually.
Oh, okay.
So I
Great.
expect that there will be something called dynamic benchmarking, which is becoming a concept right now, in which we don't trust any of the benchmarks that are out there or that we have, and that we dynamically change them over time. This is time consuming. Imagine that you need to evaluate across 48 languages. And if you want to do this, you need natively created benchmarks. But we are an industry capable of providing this, right? So this is maybe something that will become something new, a new service that this industry can offer to the world. So benchmarks, because it's a big deal to detect them. So there's also work towards detecting leakage during inference and people trying to detect and rewrite data and decontaminate benchmarks. So there's a lot of insecurity right now. This is a stance that I take against leakage. And this is a warning that if your results look suspiciously good, maybe there was a problem like that. We read in one of the technical reports by ChatGPT that they actually say that to improve GPT's ability to do mathematical reasoning, we mix in data from the training set of math and GCMA to commonly studied benchmarks for mathematical reasoning in language models. Then they claim, so they go for excuses, the total number of tokens was a tiny fraction, blah, blah, and the model may or may not have seen those during training. My stance is, please, developers do not include academic or any benchmarking training, but these guys and we are training on data that is available on the internet. Everyone is doing that. So be suspicious and create benchmarks, I would say. Or maybe not, or maybe they were right. And what we would need to do is to take those benchmarks that were carefully crafted and that represent a precious and high quality knowledge for LLMs and include all of them for best model performance in the same round of model training or not. So for fair, healthy field evolution. We thought that people may have different opinions, and we would like to know your opinion. As we were seeing yesterday's session, I think that we could use the Q&A section of Zoom so that we post this question, so the answer, and you use this hand here to say which is your gut feeling about this. And then we can see what people think and we can a little bit discuss before going to the break. Or we can just post them and during the break you say yes or no and we reconvene after 10 minutes so that you can think about your answer and take a coffee, and then we are back at 4:15. Does it work? All right. So we are going to post this on the QA. Yes?
Sorry. I'm afraid that we misunderstood. And there is no QA section because it's not a webinar. It's
Oh,
yes, we are having just a Zoom meeting for now.
okay.
Yesterday it was a webinar, and today we can maybe.
Or here.
No.
Use the chat.
Yes.
Or use the chat.
Yes,
The chat
here is Q&A. Yes, I have found it. It was just for a webinar. It was just on the starting panel, and for Zoom meeting, it's hidden under 3 dots.
All right, so we can use the QA or the chat. Okay, we can use the chat maybe. Okay, I'm gonna post them benchmarks in so you can vote. Okay, benchmarks out. Thoroughly think about it because you are not maybe in the world of development and you want the best possible model. So everything that is out there should go inside. And then we need to create new benchmarks all the time. So think about it with a coffee or tea. We reconvene in 10 minutes. The question is, should we include benchmarks in LLM training? Sorry. Yeah.
Question to the technical team. Since we have a 10-minute break, do we have a screensaver? Katya, Paula, do we have a screensaver from yesterday?
We only have the videos. Not sure if
Let's
that's
put a video
yeah.
screensaver
Alright.
so that we know when we reconvene.
Alright.
Okay.
Gema, Mariya, so your screen will be replaced with a screensaver, and you'll share your screen again once you're ready.
Thank you very much.
It's a yesterday's screensaver, so.
All right.
Okay, see you in 10 minutes, right?
Yes. You
Yes,
can start the
yeah.
discussion in the meanwhile because it's
Yeah.
only Gema and Mariya speaking, and the audience is strangely silent, perhaps under the weight of all the information.
Yeah, I think there are too many doubts, just like me. A lot of questions.
I was expecting more questions. Hello.
Hello.
I'm already go back.
Yeah. Did you have a nice coffee?
No, I was answering questions.
Oh my God. Yeah, I
No,
saw there are a lot
I,
of questions in the chat. Did you manage to answer them all? Or maybe we can like let let the participants speak if they have a question.
yeah, we can go through them. Maybe, yeah, a couple of them that I couldn't answer. Yeah. Should I share my screen, or are we fine with having this discussion like that so I can see?
I actually have a question. So the developers are in charge of creating the benchmarks, or there are specific person that do it? Like, how does it work? And how do we know it's a good benchmark?
So developers shouldn't, but they are actually behind many of the benchmarks that are out there because they need to develop them. The others are just like community crafted or things that were in the field before LLMs came in. There were benchmarks for NLP tasks.
Okay.
So summarization, there was an NLP task related to that. Translation as well. Question answering as well. So we have this old, it's a blend of old and new benchmarks. And the thing is that developers stay away from them, don't even look at them.
It's mostly people that like they craft the benchmarks, right?
But for example, right now, we want to cover Norwegian nynorsk bokmål, and we ask people to create benchmarks. So questions and answers, summarization, translation. We gave them the guidelines to do that. So developers are involved somehow, although they are not. Maybe there's not full involvement.
Okay, so you don't really need to have like a super technical skills to develop a benchmark, right? Am I right? Okay.
Yes. A benchmark is what I was showing, for example, for question and answering is a question, some answers, and then you have the right answer to check during evaluation if that was the expected output.
Yeah. The one you showed about the astronomy, yes.
Yeah, so you can measure.
Okay.
So what should we do? Should we go and through the questions? Should we say something about the debate we just opened before the break?
Yeah, there are a few questions. Maybe Marta, if you want to like ask your question to Gema, if you like to open your camera, or maybe we can answer like in the chat.
I guess Marta's question is about applying all the benchmarks to the case of machine translation. Am I understanding right?
Yeah, I see it's related to
Yes,
translation.
sorry, I was muted and I wasn't sure. Yeah, I'm also, and I'm very sorry, I'm pretty new to this as well, so I'm not sure up to what extent the margin would apply to like the things that I would like to do, which is like, yes, as you mentioned, Mariya, to understand if my MT created with LLMs is good enough, and how to create an evaluation model that gives a confidence score. Would you use benchmark sorry, for that at all?
Yes, for MT evaluation, you also need benchmarks, and there are some specific benchmarks for machine translation evaluation. I will also mention them at the end when we talk about use cases for MT and localization. And yes, most of benchmark cases are more generic than machine translation, because machine translation for LLMs, machine translation is only one of instructs. So it is included in some benchmarks, but it is not the main reason for for many open benchmarks. So, but anyway, we have test sets and benchmarks for machine translation, and I will mention them later.
Thanks very much.
So what else? Visual examples. I'm not sure you have visual examples of benchmarks later on for the use cases. But someone was asking about them. There are many available. So we showed that the question answering for machine translation, it would be the traditional input and reference and not much more. So that when you have the output generated by the LLM, you compare it to the reference. These benchmarks are not much different than the test sets. They are actually exactly as the test sets used to be. Then about the guidelines, yes, of course. This is some work that we are doing inside the HPLT project, in which we are creating public benchmarks for many languages and adding them to a public repository. So the guidelines will be also public, so we can share them. And it's about minimum things like start with a capital letter, otherwise you will have, it's really things that are very minimal, but that need to be taken into account when variating prompts and doing benchmarks. Technically demanding to create a benchmark internally. Not much. Mariya, do you want to take this one? Because I may be very biased because I just work with technical people. It's like filing the
It Yeah, it depends on what benchmark do you want to create and what use case do you use. Is it narrow? Is it broad? Is it do you need to have deep expertise, or do you need to have just general cases? So it depends. Like just general cases and I don't know, some easy benchmarks for actually for popular languages. I guess it's not very difficult, but lower source languages, they can't be assisted with synthetics for now. So it takes more efforts.
Then there's something with the formatting, if you want to include them into some evaluation framework, but it's not a big deal.
It actually, if you create internal benchmark for your internal framework, it's usually not a big deal, because you're you know all the things starting working. But if you create benchmark and then you want to adjust it to some methodology, it's a big deal, because apparently it can be that your benchmarks doesn't suit it.
Then how large it should be?
How large it should be. It also depends on case. We normally WMT, for example, we normally used previously like 2,000 sentences when it was sentence based. For now, it's like 100 documents or something near that. We always count. sometimes we count tokens, but for different languages, tokens are different, so we can't compare interlingual if we count tokens. So maybe near 100 texts.
Yeah, they're basically not very long. It's between 100 and 1,000 individual cases, depending on for at least for the available benchmarks. Then, if we want to go scientific about that, and if you need to, for example, create a benchmark sampling out your data, there's a calculator on the size of the benchmarks. You can scientifically calculate how many items should you put to have statistically significant benchmarks. And I have this in the next slide. If we go back to the presentation, I think that yeah, we have a raised hand also.
Yeah, first of all, I want to reinforce Elaine's question. What's the difference between benchmark and test set? Is it the same thing? Pretty much.
Yes.
So, but my question is the example that you showed of a benchmark is a very precise one, the one that has only one answer. Okay, you ask the question, you have 4 choices, one of them is the correct and the others are all wrong. But when you think of translations, having only one reference is not the only correct answer. So how does that make it much more complicated? Because before we used one reference, my translation is different from yours, mine is as good as yours, and blue score would punish me. But now we have LLMs. Can we ask the LLM, does it look like this reference, sounds like this reference, is similar to this reference? And if it is, say that it's a good translation? Is there something like this?
Yeah, then it depends on the metric that you use. If you
Okay.
use a metric that it's based on exact n-gram, so exactly the same sentence as is in the reference, so it's not a question of the LLM itself, although you gave me an idea and we could ask the LLM, so LLM as a judge, probably.
Yep.
But it's rather the metric that will tell you this information. So if you use a metric that can handle semantics, like Comet, for example, then
Okay.
we are not inventing. So if we are to talk about machine translation, we are not inventing anything. The benchmarks from machine translation are different from the old test sets. In the form, we query the new thing, which is with a prompt, which is so dumb. You need to say, hey, translate this for me.
Okay.
Previously, we had a function and we didn't have to insert the instruction into the test set. Now we do. We created a new problem about we need a good prompt for translation when it was just translate, and that is, and that was all. Yeah. No,
Yeah, we can go back to the presentation and we can open up the discussion later.
Yes, I think that I'm going back to the presentation to where we left it. And I saw in the QA the hands up and hands down for benchmarks in, benchmarks out. And they were almost on par, 19 against 22 when I took a look. And I saw some comments that I liked, that maybe a blend of let's keep the benchmarks for some time completely decoupled from training and then include them and create new benchmarks. If you ask me as a developer, I would say stay out of benchmarks. So never use them for any purpose. Now we have these very big problems that we need to decontaminate the tons of terabytes of data sets that we want to use for training LLMs from scratch because we know they are contaminated. So, and this is a big thing that we need to do. So I don't want to have this extra work, but I also realized that anyway, at some point, they would be on the internet. So maybe that's not such a bad idea. Many people are saying we should keep benchmarks private. And this is also a big debate because if you keep them private and then you can only show the results and that gives more blindness to the field. But yeah, I mean, there's maybe not, this is not white and black, and there could be gray shades as an answer to this debate. So thank you for contributing. I had a last slide on benchmark are a reasonable proxy to evaluation, but far from perfect. And yeah, they should be representative. You should decide on a sample strategy and size. And you have here a link to a size calculator. It's important because otherwise it could be a too, let's say, difficult thing to do if you want to make a benchmark that is of a bigger size that you can handle. Maybe adapt, review your benchmarks, update them, and define a strategy for dynamic benchmarking. So to change benchmarks frequently. We are also investigating how to do that automatically. So dynamic benchmarking sometimes means changing some words, but leaving the texts of the benchmarks basically the same. Metrics. Heading to Mariya.
Yeah, thank you. I'll maybe go quickly through next slide. Yeah, through types of metrics we use. Can you change the next slide, or are you changing and we don't see?
Yeah.
Okay, sure. Because I thought that it's the same problem I experienced yesterday, but fortunately we are okay. So what and how we measure here? There are computational metrics and they are more used in the training process like perplexity, accuracy, and so on. Evaluation with LLM as a judge, which was mentioned previously sometimes. And custom human evaluation, which is like MQM and so on. Next slide, please. So yes, computational metrics, the most notable computational metrics are perplexity, n-gram overlap metrics, well-known BLO, which I guess everyone here knows, and which was mentioned already by someone speaking, Rouge and Meteor, also embedding-based similarity. These metrics don't require any effort by human, except of writing the code and building into framework. But they are not enough, as I already mentioned in benchmark section. Computational metrics are not enough to measure the real quality. Next slide, please. Yes, next thing is evaluation with LLM as a judge. You don't require for these people at real time, but you require people to prepare benchmark, as we talked about it. It is evaluation using another LLM with specific prompt to evaluate against benchmarks. And it could be used in different types of benchmarks with different prompts and could be used in different setups. You can evaluate model isolated, or you can build side by side, yes, as best setup, and prompt your LLM as a judge to be a judge for this setup. Next slide, please. And custom human evaluation, it's, I think, what is well known since machine translation, but has sometimes new forms. We are using experts to evaluate LLM's result. It's time consuming and money consuming, as also everyone should know. And but it's very good for gaining insights and red teaming models for especially tough cases for models. So when you have people real time, they can real time challenge your model and real time give you signals. It's very expensive, but it's very useful. Next slide, please. Yeah, and so all these approaches, sorry, I thought I have one more slide, but no. All these approaches can be used, but all these approaches have pros and cons. And so when you use them, you must be aware why and where they are applicable.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I was adding to Maria's introduction to metrics that myself, I'm starting to feel overwhelmed with metrics already for LLMs. Now that I criticize so much Bleu, I'm starting to miss it because we used to have 3 or 4 metrics, and now we have tons of metrics that we need to interpret. But maybe we have one hand raised, Mariana.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, maybe you, or maybe I'm trying to open my video. I don't see, but it's fine. Maybe you will cover this later, but I have a question on the LLM as a judge. And I was reading a paper, I think this month, and it was related to the how the LLM as a judge is performing when you have more context. And I find that interesting, and I want to know your opinion about, because there was this study and they found that when you have full documents, the LLM was detecting less error, so was missing actually many issues compared to the moment when the LLM was judging segments separately. So I want to know, I don't know if you have experience with that, or maybe you are covering this later, so I don't know.
Mariya, you want to add something to that? So about accuracy on different accuracy on full documents than sentences. I guess because of the context. I have no idea about LLM as a judge. I was using LLMs to annotate data before we called it LLM as a judge, but I don't have a full experience. We use them, for example, to label registers or to double check translation, but at sentence level, actually. So I would like to actually see that study that you were mentioning, Mariana. I'm not sure if Mariya, you have something to add to this?
I think you have answered pretty better.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a next session in which you will be touching exactly how LLM as a judge works practically. So I don't want also to, yeah. Oh, thank you. Put it in the chat. So interesting. Yes. Yeah, what I was saying, interpreting all those metrics that we are faced with big tables of metrics everywhere. It's one of the ways in which development is going. We are even inventing new things where we had already evidence in fields like machine translation. Also because probably we want, so other people are getting their hands into different NLP tasks that were like the realm of a very narrow handful of people, and other people from other fields are coming into this, and then all those metrics are there, But there's also a trend that I see recently in papers in trying to create more interpretable metrics or views out of those metrics. For example, this one that we were seeing previously that was based on n-grams and perplexity, when you see the graph that they put in their website or in the papers, they don't report perplexity or n-gram accuracy directly. They are trying to represent the possibility, in this case, that an LLM is reproducing verbatim a benchmark. So this is percentages, and this is much more easy to understand for people. So that was just a comment on metrics. There are, besides performance metrics that we all already know, like Rouge, Bleu, Meteor, and so on, there are other things that we need to take into account. It was words, now it's tokens. Tokenization is a thing that you need to consider when using LLMs, because tokenizers that are implemented in each of them, so the way they just split things, chunks of text, which are not even words, is different. They vary. You need to take into account also for cost, what's the input versus output tokens that are allowed, or what's the cost of that. Speed is measured in tokens per second. Cost is measured in price, for example, for 1 million tokens, and see what they mean by tokens. And models are trained on tokens, on trillions of tokens, actually. So this became a thing to take into account. It's not exactly a metric, but an indicator. Model parameters, when you take a look to different models, you will see always a number like something plus billion, which is how big the models are. And probably if you are comparing among models and you are surprised, it's maybe because they are of very, very different size. For example, if you are comparing the models that initiatives like Mistral or others are doing, starting with what we call baby LLMs that are 8 billion parameters or something like that, they might be very different to the last ones that are around the 700 billion parameters. And next to the name of each model, there's always this information. It's not the same if you have trained for 8 billion parameters that if you have trained for 30 or 75. So something to take into account. Then to make models go faster, we see that there are quantization efforts. So that makes the model faster and lighter, but it can also, so increase speed, but it can also give you decreased performance. So that is also something. And maybe emissions or energy consumption, it's something that we should take a look to when evaluating LLMs. Because lately, so this is still a small portion of the electricity demand compared to cryptocurrencies. It's becoming on par, or traditional data centers. But if you have to run evaluation on different LLMs and your benchmark have like inference for 2 million different use cases, then you might be a little bit conscious of how much this is impacting on the demand on electricity of your own company or the world itself. We ran 2,500 evaluation on 500 different checkpoints of a model that we are training. So when this becomes big, it's even more problematic because you need the computational cost to be able to do it. And that was all I think about metrics. Okay, we have a question in the chat. Can you speak about using machine learning metrics, precision, recall, accuracy, F1 to measure model performance for various translation workflows, LLM use cases, versus other suggested metrics in the slide? Precision, recall, and accuracy and F1s like Meteor, Rouge, or Blé, or Comet are still as valid as they were before. It really depends on the use case and what's the meaningful metric for your use case. So we are still using them. The thing is that when you stick to a metric to see performance, then you need to stick it across the time to see the evolution. So then the choice, the name of choices is too high to be covered in a session like this, but they are still valid. If they were meaningful for your purposes before, they are meaningful for your purposes right now. If you are already used to Comet scores, you can keep using Comet scores. There's no change here. Not everything is completely new. So do you have any experience with customizing a metric like Comet to meet style and terminology requirements? We never use a single metric for that. We use different metrics for example, for terminology adherence. So I don't think that we have customized Comet precisely for that. We just used a blend of different metrics to see different aspects of machine translation, probably because we are in the development side of things. But for example, comparing traditional machine translation and LLMs, this is more and more interesting because you can, for example, provide terminology or not provide terminology at different times and measure. So you have now, you can widen the options just because the way we are interacting with LLMs, that was not exactly the same as with NMTs, because you could also provide terminology, but it was not taken into account in the same way as LLMs do it right now. Mariya, you wanted to add something to any of the questions?
Yes, I just can add that these metrics were also not enough for neural MT. Actually, they were enough for statistical machine translation, but for neural MT they were not enough. It doesn't mean they are like redundant or bad or something like this. But regarding these metrics, nothing changed. They still can be used to measure these differences between your translation and reference translation, or your translation post-editing translation, and so on. But it's, I guess, nothing new. Yeah.
So let's move on very quickly because there are 10 minutes left. Yeah, frameworks. Where to evaluate all this? Like, it's not only model performance, it's so many other things that we are trying to evaluate when deciding on whether to use a solution or an LLM. And actually, there's a myriad of evaluation frameworks popping out there. So I came up with a classification and differences between The ones that are more oriented for performance, so maybe we should call here LLM performance, and the ones that look into other things, so that see the LLM just as a component and look into other features. Ones are more developer-oriented versus production-oriented. You may focus on evaluating task performance versus use case. The ones that are developer-oriented already incorporate standard benchmark and metrics, so they are built-in. And the ones that are more oriented to use cases maybe do also have built-in benchmark, but they are not oriented towards that. They are more oriented to create your own benchmark, create your own metric, custom metrics. So the ones that are oriented to performance do also maybe are maybe also useful for dataset evaluation and training evaluation of the LLMs themselves, while the other ones are end-to-end usefulness for use cases. Developers are still into this monotask mindset. The production-oriented frameworks are much more multitask. And the things that you do with each of them are different. Maybe to compare among models or versions, you should use one of the ones that are oriented to performance. Or if you want just to evaluate GenAI as a component to plug and play different ones, you should use the other ones. I've listed what's in one, so performance-oriented evaluation or GenAI-based solutions evaluation frameworks, but I think that this is too much to cover here. I've just listed the ones that are open source. You will see that there's a myriad of them. Maybe to start, maybe as a rule of thumb, Literal is the one that already incorporates most of the academic benchmarks, LLM evaluation harness as well. So you could start with one of those. They are very easy to use. Code is available. And then if you want to experiment with generative AI, and then once you are convinced, you can switch to a richer evaluation framework that implements many other things. So that would be my tip. Then I had a slide about leaderboards because other people already run evaluation within their frameworks and publish regular results on leaderboards, but my take here is that they are all messy. Yes, you will have the presentation with the links. They are just messy. There was this big initiative by Hugging Face. They evaluated thousands of models on a myriad of benchmarks, and they saw that this was a mess, and they become easily obsolete. But they are still useful to learn because you have all the concepts in those leaderboards and they make your life easier, but don't trust the results. That would be everything that I want to cover because I want to leave the next session to Mariya to talk about specific use cases.
Yeah, thank you. I'll be very quick because we have 4 minutes. And actually, I should go after these 4 minutes, unfortunately. So this is the section about what we had questions about, where localization meets LLM evaluation. What can be done to make LLM evaluation better, and where localization specialists and huge localization expertise is really useful for all this stuff, actually. There are translation quality assessment, that's what we are always talking about, but also language capabilities assessment, which is very relevant for monolingual writing tasks for large language models. And also cultural sensitivity evaluation. That is what Gema already mentioned when she talked about benchmark warnings, that they should be cultural sensitive, and we should maintain this. Next slide, please. So translation quality assessment, here are the benchmarks you can use for it. Maybe you know all of them because benchmarks are actually a new word, is actually a new word for test sets, as we found out. So translation evaluation, we evaluate whether LLM translates correctly, and LLM should be people expert required. Actually, it is missed here. I need to correct this error. Experts required for making good benchmarks should be fluent in both source and target languages and native and target languages. It is our requirement when we do WMT benchmarks, as I have mentioned in the chat when I answered someone. We do new evaluation sets, new evaluation benchmarks every year to be sure that no one of our participants got them into training data. And we use experts who are native of target language and who know well source language, yes. Also, we evaluate cross-lingual consistency, and it is about evaluation whether information remains consistent across languages. We also need such experts as for translation to create such benchmarks and to create good benchmarks, because previously also Hem spoke about initiative when there are multiple languages, but we can't rely on this because there are too much data and they're not quite good verified sometimes. And here are the examples of these benchmarks. You should maybe know Flores, also Extreme and Xblue are good enough. Next slide. Thank you. Also, language capabilities assessment, what I mentioned, it is about testing script and writing system of LLM, because we know that maybe you know and you tried famous DeepSeek, and it even changes changes between different writing styles for some languages, and also not having in mind that it even changes from some languages to Chinese. Apparently, just like let me speak Chinese from now. And all these moments should be evaluated. And we in research community, people also use Flores for this evaluation, but also there are more specific benchmarks. For example, if you know the model Sia Lion, it is for Sia languages. They make their own benchmarks for Southeast Asian languages to evaluate consistency and if their model performs equally for all these languages. And also we can evaluate language creativity and style, and also morphological richness of language. It's mainly for morphology-rich languages and mainly for low-resource languages. We need to take a look every time we use LLM for low-resource language. Next slide, please. And the last but not least, cultural sensitivity evaluation. Cultural appropriateness benchmarks are popular now, and we, with the research community, tends to start working with them because previously they were not so popular. And there are some examples for these benchmarks. And also not even languages, but dialect variations should be measured, and how well dialect is preserved or understood by LLM model. So it's not about generating dialect speech, not about only generating the dialect speech, but also about understanding dialects by the model. And here, 1 minute of advertising. Next slide, please. We have brand new benchmark Gema assembled by Toloka Research in collaboration with Zubai. It's AI Institute in United Arab Emirates. There are 4 evaluation criteria, and it's also a multimodal benchmark. So it assembles also images, not only texts. And it is valid for 4 dialects of Arabic and also standard Arabic. Next slide, please. Here is just an example of data point, just to show you what we have done. And it was really hard work because dialect variants are much more difficult to work with than different languages. And on previous slide, there was QR code. You can go there and yes, download. Thank you.
So we had this slide saying, do you have any questions? And in our mind, if you hadn't, we had a ton of questions for you. But I think that we exhausted the time and we don't want to take the time from other sessions.
Actually, we can discuss a little bit about your presentation. Yeah. So I wanted to check with the audience. How do you guys feel after these 2 hours? What do you think? Have you had any experience with the benchmarking?
I guess the last part of the session, we killed everyone's brain. It was too much, probably. There's someone in the chat suggesting to create benchmarks, getting inspiration from LLMs. Sure. I think that this is what people doing synthetic benchmarks are actually doing. And they go even farther. They don't ask, help me write. They just say, write some examples. And they are actually doing that for translation purposes. So to instruct models to translate for low resource languages, and as well as back translated data had something to learn from. This kind of synthetic data also has some knowledge to distill into the model. So,
well, someone got discouraged, as I can see in the chat. Like what I realized, I don't want to evaluate LLMs anymore. This is so complex.
it is, and go to the first slide. Is exactly what we were doing at the beginning. Input, output, benchmark metric, and iterate and see if it fits your purpose. No.
There is also a raised hand from Christian. If you want to open your mic and.
Yes. Thank you, Gema. Thank you, Mariya. It was a very detailed presentation, and yeah, you gave us all a lot of food for thought for sure. Can't wait to get my hands on the presentation and click all the links. But yeah, I have a question for you as experts. How would you approach in my use case? For example, and I think that my use case can be applicable to some other participants, because I mainly work with mainstream LLMs that everyone uses, your GPTs, your Claudes, Geminis, and everything. And I don't really deal with custom models or anything. And what I need to do is test my narrowly topicked texts with different prompts and everything. What would you use for that? What frameworks or benchmarks?
So as I said, I would start with either light eval or LLM evaluation hardness. You just have to, it's very easy to install. It's like 3 commands that you just copy and paste, or make one of your engineers copy and paste somewhere. And you just have to put your benchmarks out there, define your metric, and you will get the results. This is very easy. Then maybe something more with a user interface, let's say. Then, for example, deep eval looks very nice, and it's based also on open source code, but they already provide a user interface and tell you, hey, upload your, so they are very nice. Upload your benchmark here. Choose among this set of metrics, and they create very cute charts for you. So it's just choosing one of the maybe one of the frameworks that were listed in the presentation.
Okay, so just start
Yeah.
benchmarking, set up a baseline, and go from there.
Yeah, because they already have the APIs to the mainstream LLMs already in place. So there's basically the technological barrier is very low.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Mariana.
Hi. So first of all, thanks for the presentation. So as I brought, very informative and practical as well. So I have a question that is related to actually Christian's question, and maybe, I mean, someone else in the audience have the same kind of issue or challenge there. What about confidentiality? Because like when you upload this thing, so if you can't use open source framework, so what can you do there? So the only chance that you have is having your own framework, right?
Yeah, Lightable, you can install it and have your own instance.
Okay.
Many of them. That's why I was just going for open source that you can have in your own servers. But they will call the LLMs anyway, so the data will travel to the LLMs through the calls, unless you have the possibility also to have an instance of the LLM by yourself. And for that, you need GPUs and the infrastructure.
Yeah, got it. Thanks.
You're welcome. Alexa.
Hello there. Thank you for your presentation. It was super packed. I'm the guy that from the chat that doesn't want to evaluate LLMs anymore. That's of course a joke, but I'm also wanted to talk with you about my specific case. Though I've been in this industry for a while, I've never worked in companies that localize lots of content, because all cases we discussed yesterday and today, they feels like they relate to cases where you have like thousands, millions of words, and all these benchmarks and frameworks apply to these volumes. But if you translate like around a few thousand words per month, and all they are super context related, like UI strings, marketing materials, creatives. It's hard to understand if you really need to implement such complex systems, or you just need to find your own way to evaluate.
You are very right. And I think that for that kind of content and volume, your best metric is user satisfaction. How do you measure that? Again, if you can, for example, for every time that you translate, put a couple of the strings that you translate into a file with the expected output in some time, you will have a benchmark of your own. And what you can do is to repeat So to just launch by something very simple, one metric, one simple line of code, and see if the new LLM that it's going to be, of course, the best one in the market, it's suitable for you. That would be my way to go.
Okay, thanks. This sounds super logical, but I needed to hear it from an expert like you to give it an extra weight. Thank you.
Okay, so let's move to the next presentation. Thank you very much, Gema. Thank you, Mariya, for your presentation. So let's do something more practical now, and let's welcome to the stage Sheree Zhang, who is a senior product manager at Human Signal, and she will guide us through practical exercises on how to set up and deliver annotation projects.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the introduction. And that was an awesome session to hear. I especially love how we kind of ended up with this question of how do we evaluate machine translations? How do we set up benchmarks? How do we create test sets of data that we can be evaluating our LLMs against? So really excited for that. That was an awesome presentation. Thank you, Gema and Mariya. In this session, I'm excited to welcome everyone to the hands-on workshop for annotation projects for machine translation evaluation. So very hand in hand with the kind of themes for today. I'm joined with my colleague, Micaela, who is a ML evangelist here at Human Signal. And also we have a special guest, Elena from Custom.MT, who will be also stepping in and sharing some of her experiences in using labeling and annotation and different templates for machine translation and how she does that in a very industry practical sense. So in this workshop, by the end of the session, you'll know how to set up a practical annotation project to evaluate machine translation. So we're going to really focus on making this hands-on and collaborative. And then we will be performing ourselves as humans an evaluation annotation of different machine translation tasks. And then finally, in step 3, we're going to finally run LLM as a judge. So get our LLM to also evaluate machine translation tasks. We'll run through this together, how to set up your LLM to run as a judge. And then we are going to, again, take a look at the results from the LLM to see, do we agree with what the LLM is judging, or can we do better? Is the LLM missing anything or any nuance there? So very excited for all of this. As we go, I do encourage you to try things out in real time. We have set up a trial instance that will contain this exact project that we'll be running through in this workshop. So kind of like preset that for you. This environment also comes with some OpenAI credits so that we can interact with some LLMs from OpenAI there. That being said, I'm going to drop a link to this hands-on workshop doc.
I dropped it, Sheree.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Micaela. So that's the workshop doc. It looks like this. You can create an account to follow along at this link here. And we also have, we already have the data set populated in the account that you'll get when you sign up. But if you would like some additional options outside of the preset languages we have, I have a data set here with also Czech to English translations, Spanish to English translations, English to Chinese translations, if you'd like to experiment with some other kind of machine translation evaluations. The default one that will come with the account as you sign up will be English to French. I grew up in Canada, and so we learned French as a second language, and that's why I am biased and picked that language. But anyway, very excited for having you all join and follow along. As you're getting set up, I'm going to run through some background on annotations and why we're even talking about this today. Kind of wanted to set the stage. So
Sheree, before you do that, I just want to make one plug. If anyone has any trouble getting into Label Studio, setting up your account, feel free to drop your questions in the chat. I'll be monitoring that as we go, so that while Sheree talks, I can help with tech support if needed.
Thank you so much, Micaela. Always very appreciated. So yeah, annotation and why it matters in GenAI and machine translation workflows. As I'm sure there's a lot of experts in this room, but I did want to reiterate that when we're building like machine translation models where we're building and kind of tuning our LLM systems. If we put garbage data in, then we get garbage responses out. The performance of your machine translation system really depends on the specificness of your training and evaluation data. So if your training data or your evaluation data is vague, your feedback loop is also vague. And I'm sure you also already all know that localization doesn't equal to translation. A raw translation might be linguistically correct, but it might miss also like a cultural or tone alignment. And when we annotate, we can help embed these expectations into the data that we're providing the models. And finally, there's a continuous evaluation process where language evolves. Like we can think about how terms like AI hallucination probably weren't commonly used or didn't exist 5 years ago. And machines wouldn't really know how to translate AI hallucination. But this is one of those examples of terms that kind of emerged and pops up. And we want to have some ongoing annotation to adapt these models. One bonus insight here is that annotation also creates like alignment across our different teams internally and also alignment across our training data. So it's not just about fixing the errors, but defining what quality means for your specific use case. And so why don't we just annotate and build quality into everything? Well, to be real, like labeling is definitely time consuming and it can definitely be very expensive. While annotation is critical to quality, it's also a pretty painful part of the workflow sometimes. Quality annotation requires a lot of time. It requires a lot of expertise. I have a group of experts here, so there's a lot of expertise in this room. And it's also, it requires a lot of clear guidelines. So for example, if we're onboarding new annotators, we need to provide guidelines on how they would translate or make some content suitable for a locale. And then as machine translation use cases grow or locales expand, think like marketing copy or customer support or legal docs, you're not just labeling in one domain or even language, but perhaps multiple. And that's also where scaling becomes hard. So how do you onboard and train those distributed annotation teams? How do you maintain consistency? And also, how do you make sure that your annotations are even accurate throughout your projects? So maybe even in the chat, I'd love to know how your experiences have been with machine translation and evaluation, perhaps even like pain points you've encountered. So if you want to drop those, that would be really interesting for me too. And before we jump in, I promise we're going to get into the workshop part very soon. Before we jumped into that, I wanted to kind of show an example of what some of our users would do in the past. A lot of the times they would have their machine translation evaluation in some sort of spreadsheet where there would be a manual side-by-side comparison of the source and the translated content. Sometimes there would be different annotators who come in, provide their scoring, and there might be some version confusion. And spreadsheets are not the best way to kind of manage these larger scale projects, especially as we're starting to scale. It becomes harder to standardize across teams, across languages. And so knowing that evaluation is both really essential and it's also quite resource intensive, this is where I wanted to walk us through on how to make it more manageable, starting with how to set up maybe your first machine translation evaluation project. So in this workshop, together we'll be going through setting up an annotation project for evaluating machine translations. Secondly, evaluating and annotating those tasks. And then thirdly, we're going to run LLM as a judge to compare an LLM's evaluation against ours on a specific MT task. We're going to start off with step one. So that was the link in the workshop document here. In this workshop, we wanted to use Label Studio. Label Studio is a platform created by Human Signal. It's a flexible data labeling platform that supports a wide range of data types from text, images, audio, to video. And it's also available in 3 editions. So this might be interesting to folks here, where there's an open source community edition And we also have two kind of hosted plans that are like, one's a starter plan and one is an enterprise plan. Starter Cloud is optimized for smaller teams and smaller projects. And the enterprise edition offers more enhanced features like security and compliance workflows, quality workflows. But at the core, Label Studio, we started off as an open source platform. It's really awesome. Encourage y'all to check it out. But we'll be actually walking through a project annotation project on Label Studio today. Cool. And with that, let's jump in. I hope y'all have been able to create an account. But I'm also going to go through this exact same process as everyone, just so that I see the exact same thing that everyone else is seeing. I'm going to create this. So bear with me for a second. Micaela, if you wanted to jump in or if there's anything standing out to you, feel free to
Yeah,
do
we've
so.
got a couple questions in the chat
Yeah.
here that I want to address. I've addressed them in the chat, but while we wait for Sheree. The first question is from Marta. Can we use QA reports from your LSPs as annotations? Would it be the same thing? In Label Studio itself, we can handle any type of data, pretty much. You'd have to play around with the template a little bit that Sheree will walk us through in a little while. But you can do any type of data labeling with Label Studio. So if you wanted to upload QA reports and evaluate those, that would be absolutely possible to do. You can reach out to me and Sheree directly via email at the end of this presentation if you want to follow up about some tools for that. We also have a question from Mariana. I noticed that annotators usually use 1 to 5 as a score. Is there any reason behind that? For machine translation itself, this tends to be just industry standard practice as far as I'm aware. You'll see in today's example that Elena will walk us through that we define for each, we call them stars in this case. We'll use like a little star rating metric. So you select 1 to 5 stars. Each star corresponds to a different level of accuracy. So 1 star is very incomplete, 5 stars is perfect. But in Label Studio, you could do whatever you want. So if 1 to 5 stars doesn't work for you, you want to be 1 to 10 stars or 1 to 7 stars, or you want to get rid of the stars altogether and do something completely different, all of that would work in Label Studio. And I think Sheree is ready, so I'll pass it back to her.
That's perfect timing, or maybe intentional timing. Thank you so much, Micaela. So now I'm in Label Studio. Hopefully, some of you all have also been able to land on this screen. So this is right after signing in. I have the homepage of the Label Studio platform where I see 2 already projects preset for me. The first one is on image captioning. So this one will contain a bunch of images, and the use case will be creating captions for them. And the second project, which will be the focus of today's session, will be on machine translation evaluation. And this is the use case where we have the kind of 5-star template, and we will be running some human evaluation annotation against it. So clicking into that project, I see this first view, which is a table of all the tasks that I am evaluating. Each task includes a source, so the source data, which was the kind of English in my project. And then I have the machine translation, which was, in this case, French. And so the data that I imported into this project was a CSV, and it contained the source, and it contained the machine translation. And then what I've set up in Label Studio here is a template for me to be able to evaluate on different tasks here. So clicking into a task, I can see this labeling template where I see the source populated and I see the machine translation output. I can highlight any errors I see. So I'm going to kind of pretend to do this. But let's say I see like an error here. I can highlight that error and it gets marked as Sheree annotated this part as an error. Let's say I also wanted to provide an overall score of translation quality. It's overall, maybe 4 stars. I can also annotate that here. And then we have a rubric for how we define each star rating below as well. And then finally, let's say anything below 5 stars I want to provide a comment on. I can say, you provide some reasoning as to why I think this is not the best kind of annotation, or sorry, the best machine translation. So this is one way to start creating some annotations for a machine translation project. Instead of our previous kind of spreadsheet where we had, manual comments, ad hoc comments, ratings in different columns. This is one configurable template that you can customize. So if you don't want 5 stars, but you want a rating 1 to 10, or you want maybe a classification instead of just what kind of use case, or what kind of topics are identified here, or what kind of errors are identified, all of that is customizable as well. So in this case, I'm going to add just my kind of comments here. So maybe like nos close soutien doesn't make sense here. I'm just putting in some comments for the example. Doesn't make sense here. I can add that. And then once I'm done with my evaluation of this task, I click submit. And this becomes saved as an annotation created by Sheree 2 minutes ago. Awesome. And then as an annotator, I can now go through the rest of our tasks and manually annotate as many as I would like. So next task got populated with a different kind of translation and a different source, and I can go ahead and annotate if I see any errors or annotate any ratings and add any comments. So if y'all would like to try out, I'd encourage at least trying to annotate or interact with one of the tasks, and then don't forget to submit that task. Any questions at this point so far with the kind of machine translation and evaluation template that we have, or even the project setup?
Sheree, are you planning to cover collaboration in this as well?
Let's do that right now. That's a great point. Yeah, so one awesome thing about
Sorry, I have a very quick question. Once you're done with your annotation, what's the output? Is it the same as the file that you inputted, or is it something else?
Maybe I can chime in at this point very quickly.
Yeah,
Because so we've been using in Custom.MT, we've been using Label Studio for a while. The output of what you're saying, what you're going to do here, so labeling this kind of things, is going to be, it has different formats, but you can imagine it as a huge Excel file, for instance, which is a CSV, for instance, or it can be a JSON or something else, where everything is stored, let's say task by task, so segment by segment in a sense. So for each segment, you will see how many stars you have selected, where is the highlighting, how much time you spent on that, if there are comments, if there are, other issues, or, the interface is very customizable. So depending on what you want to see, you will see as a CSV file, as a JSON file, depending on the easiest way for you to then manage your data.
It looks like Sheree is pulling an example right now. I'll also point out, if you're working in your own instance of Label Studio right now, if you click on the blue 2 arrows, the 2 triangle brackets of the far side of the data manager, right where Sheree is pointing now, you can see what the JSON will look like. So you can see at the top here, we have the ID, which is an internal ID number to Label Studio. You can also upload any metadata you want to this file. You don't have to show it to your annotators if you wanted to associate an ID number that you have to your task. At the top, we have our data. Then we have our annotation section, which lists out all of the annotations your annotators have done. This section will look different depending on your template. And finally, there's a prediction section, which we'll get to later. Does that answer your question, Martha?
Yes, very much. Thanks.
Yeah, and I see a hand from Mariana as well.
Yeah, I have one another question on this, and I mean, I get that it's always customizable, and my question, probably this is possible, no? Can you also revise the translation, not only add a comment, but maybe add a column with the the correction of the translation, or
Absolutely, you can. So if you go to the settings page, maybe it's a little more complicated than it needs to be, but that's okay. If we go to the settings page here, and you click on labeling interface, and you click on code, you can see the way that we define all of this section. And this is a little bit of a complicated labeling configuration file because there's a lot of styling happening here, making all the text different colors, putting things on different columns. But essentially, it's basically a custom HTML file. So if you're used to working with HTML or CSS, that's basically what you're working with here. We have a full gallery of templates available on our website if you want a place to start, as well as a playground where you can drag and drop different elements to play around with. But essentially, you can add whatever you'd like here. So you can even make this text field editable, or as Sheree is doing now, she's adding another field at the bottom. You could put it wherever you want in the labeling config. It's just easiest for us in this demonstration to put it at the bottom to add a correct translation here. And that will automatically get uploaded and populated, and that would be perfectly fine.
This is one other example of projects that we have had. You would have, for instance, your source, your target, but also a second field with your target where you can do post editing, and then we can calculate edit distance, so how many edits you do to the machine translation to get to the final output, to then calculate, you know, how, let's say, how good the machine translation is, or how much time you can spare by using that particular machine translation. We have done this, for instance, to compare different machine translations by blinding, let's say, so making a blind test where you can see the outputs, but you don't know what machine translation is coming, the output is coming from, and then we can compare the edit distance in the end.
I've gone ahead and dropped a link to the templates in the chat. If you're interested in some of the other possibilities of Label Studio, you can definitely go ahead and check that out. It's not complete. I want to remind everybody that the limits of Label Studio are sort of similar to the limits of your imagination, in that you can combine all of these tags in completely different ways for completely different tasks. These are just some examples of what we have. And Yulia, you go into your settings, and then labeling interface is on the left-hand sidebar. And I'll pass it back to Sheree so we don't derail this too far.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you for all like the pro tips, the chiming in. Great to hear also the kind of how Elena and Custom.MT use the tool. One thing that would be interesting, and I heard a question on this, was how do I have, let's say, multiple annotations, and how do I compare what annotator one, let's say I make an annotation, and what my team makes, and how do I compare these two annotations? So let's run through a task now where so far on my first task, I only have my annotation. But let's say someone else comes in. I don't have Micaela in this account, but let's pretend that we have another annotator come in who sees this task and also makes an annotation. So I'm going to simulate that by duplicating an annotation and changing it up. So I have the Sheree annotation from 9 minutes ago, and now I'm going to come in as a pretend new user. But you can add teammates to your account, so you can really actually run this. And I'm going to change up the second, let's say, annotation. Let's say I don't see any mistakes. I think it's a perfect 5-star translation, and I'm not going to add any comments because it was perfect. I'm going to submit that, and so this is my second annotation in this task now. And what I can do is compare the side by side the annotations all made for the same task. So I've got Sheree from this ID and Sheree from this ID, both creating annotations, and I have now 2 annotations in this task. There's cases where you might have multiple, like 5, 10, even more, so you can compare them also quickly side by side what all the annotations look like against your labeling template. And then if I go back into my data manager view, where I have my task, I can now see also an agreement score where Sheree annotator 1 and Sheree annotator 2 had very different annotations clearly. And so my agreement score between these annotators is 0. So this is a good way to kind of pairwise understand which tasks are getting the lowest agreement score between your annotators. This is a way to identify which tasks are maybe problematic, so which tasks are particularly tricky, or also maybe you're finding one annotator maybe needs some more guidelines or some more instruction. It'd also be a good way to get feedback yourself and to maybe provide some more instruction to an annotator. Let's say Sheree 2 comes in and like realizes, actually, I'm going to fix this. I'm going to update it to a 4-star, not great is the comment. And then I update my annotation. So now my 2 annotations are a little bit more similar, where they're both 4 stars, There's a comment in there. If I go back to Data Manager, I can see also kind of live that agreement score changes. So as my annotators go back and revise their annotations, the agreement score between them also updates. Also, and then I see some more questions. I'm gonna probably let Micaela answer them in the comments so we can continue and try out the LLM as a judge part, which is very exciting. I hope everyone's as excited as I am. But so far, what we've done is create a annotation project, and we've created some manual annotations ourselves. I'm going to flip back to this screen and kind of show you where we started, which was this spreadsheet of different annotations from different users. And now we have this templatized format where I can collaborate with my team and generate annotations and measure the quality between the annotations from different users. With that, I actually wanted to take a little break and ask Elena to maybe walk through a couple of slides that she created to help provide some insight into how she uses evaluation and how she uses the Label Studio platform for annotation and MT evaluation.
Indeed. So thanks for passing over. Yeah, so it's just a couple of slides to give you an idea on how we actually use this for our clients. So in a very kind of industry-like settings, in a very practical way. As Micaela and Sheree mentioned, Label Studio is a very customizable tool. So you can do almost anything as long as you kind of find your way around creating your own settings, also your own template to be used then for the evaluation. These are just some of the things that we have done during the years with Label Studio. So we have done model ranking, which is partly what you might be doing right now, so with the stars, but it can also be, so for one other client, we had this kind of ranking simply by showing the linguist in this case, so the human, the different possibilities, so the different models, outputs without telling which model created which one, and they had to move the tabs, like the buttons up or down, depending on whether they liked the output or not. We had, I think there was a question in the chat about this before. So it can be very detailed, right? So we have tried also to use MQM and DQF by giving, so the selecting together with with our client which error they wanted to use and which categories or which severity each error should have. So we decided in the end to have either major and minor or major, minor, and critical, depending on the interest that they had in each error. And in the end, they had, I think, about 20, 25 error types, each with its own kind of severity level. We are now trying to implement also the latest error span annotation metric or setup that was proposed lately before one of the latest WMT conferences. That's one other possibility. So instead of going very deep and very detailed into which errors you find, which sometimes creates very low interannotator agreement, because as we know, so just as the translations can be very different from one person to the other, the error annotation can also be very different, and therefore the interannotator agreement might be a bit low. And I will show you this in my upcoming presentation after Sheree is done with hers. We have done edit distance, as we mentioned before. So I think you kind of stole a piece of my presentation about this. Very, very easy. So you had your output, machine translation output, you had to post edit, and then you can calculate time savings, right? So how much time it would save with one model instead of the other, effort, how much you post edit, and speed, of course. So how much time you spend on each segment. These are all data that are automatically calculated by Label Studio. So when you download the export of your data, this is all very clear, segment by segment, right? And again, inter-annotator agreement, about which I will speak a bit later. Sheree, can you move forward? Thank you. So in the template that you are now using, this is a possible outcome. So this is a ranking of different models, random ones. These are all fake data, right? So just to give you an idea of then how you can see the data that you have. As you can see, you basically calculate how many stars, how many segments you get 5-star for each segment, for each, model. So in this case, Google gets a very high number of 5 stars, so perfect segments. And I don't know, GPT gets, however, a very low number of 1 star, so terrible segments. In the end, you kind of calculate the percentage of each model for each star, and you get that apparently Google has a very high perfect and or good segments, so it's very usable. Amazon, not so much. And this is not because it's Amazon, but just because I simply took a random one and put its name below it. So I'm not sure it's Amazon. Don't quote me on the quality of that particular model. Next one, please. Thanks. And this is another example about the MQM, DQF, or more detailed error annotation type, let's say, where you can see that, again, you have different models that are being evaluated. And for each model, you can see how many segments are marked with that specific error. So Google has a 2.60% of accuracy errors, while GPT has a higher number of accuracy errors. On the other hand, let me see, other in Google are pretty high and GPT are slightly lower. Again, fake data, so don't take this for real things. But this is how you would see. And this is particularly useful when you are then going to be using this data to train your models or to take countermeasures, let's say, into consideration. So for instance, if one model has a very high number of terminology errors, what you might want to do is implement terminology heavily on that model. In other cases, well, spelling mistakes by now are pretty uncommon in any case, both in LLMs and in and in machine translation, fortunately. Inappropriate might be interesting. So if you see that your NMT is translating inappropriately, then you either post-edit more, train the NMT, or chain up an LLM. So you ask an LLM to post-edit. On the other hand, if it's your LLM, your AI, that is giving you inappropriate translations, you might want to tweak the prompts. So this will give you more detailed outcomes on the different error types. This is just some examples. I'd be happy, if you have other questions, I will check the chat in the meantime. So feel free to drop my questions there, and I will pass it back to Sheree at this point. I think if I don't forget any slides I made, which is possible.
Oh, that's all I've got.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you, Elena. That's really helpful. I think it's always really interesting to how you've kind of used the tool, built your own framework on top of it, and are able to evaluate different kinds of models in your case that are like not that the user doesn't know about, but you are actually evaluating translations from different models. So I know the data was kind of synthetic in this example, but this process that you've built out is definitely really real and very cool. So thank you for sharing. All right, so now we're at step 3 of the workshop, where we'll be running LLM as a judge. And this is the more new and experimental part of this process. So previously we have done annotations ourselves, where we're viewing machine translations and annotating them for quality. And now we're going to use an LLM as the judge, which uses a large language model to now assess and score the outputs of the source and machine translation against, again, the same criteria that we were using. So those ratings, any error identified, and any outputs visible. So why would someone care? Why would you want to use LLM as a judge? Well, I'm sure a lot of you have already tried out using maybe ChatGPT or even an LLM directly, but LLMs can be trained and prompted to judge machine translation output. They can be fast and scalable. They can be pretty good in cost. And they can also provide a baseline if you are trying to get some assessments of large volumes of data. And so those are some of the definite pros. But with those pros, since it's fast and cheap, it might not lack or it might not have the same amount of context that one of your experts would have. And in fact, I'm sure it doesn't have the same level of context that your experts would have. An LLM might not be able to handle also diverse cases where it might not align with human judgment. And then as you're scaling to, let's say, thousands of examples, it can be really sensitive to the prompt wording. So if you make an error in how let's say, prompt the LLM, that error can be propagated to the rest of your tasks. So the questions here are like, how well does the LLM judge align with our human assessments? And secondly, what kind of context do we need to provide to the LLM to make sure that it can accurately judge what we want it to judge? So with that being said, I'm going to switch back to my Label Studio interface. Hopefully y'all have maybe a couple tasks annotated, but we're going to switch now to this hamburger menu where we have tab number 3, and it's called Prompts. So Prompts is Label Studio's interface for interacting with LLMs. In this case, I'm going to click into Prompts where I see a couple example ones already pre-created for me. For the sake of this kind of workshop, we're going to use one directly that's already created for our project. So we've got this auto-label machine translation evaluation one. This maps to the same project we were looking at, so we're going to use this prompt to help generate some outputs. So in this case, I've got this prompt I can already use, but if you wanted to create your own, you can also click Create a Prompt at the top right-hand side, enter your prompt name, and then pick the project that you want to use. So in this case, I'm going to use this pre-created one, auto-label machine translation evaluation. There's a little tutorial here, but we're going to skip it since I'll be saying the same thing. But this is an interface now where we can interact with an LLM. So these are all of the different OpenAI models that we have access to from our based off of our API key. And then here I have a prompt body. So this is an interface where I can provide the LLM with any instruction that I would like to give it so that it can most accurately evaluate the same source data and same machine translation data. So again, these tasks are the same task data that we saw in our manual annotation. And now it's populated here in this table so I can get some outputs from an LLM in terms of what the LLM predicts as errors, predicts as ratings, and adds as their comments. So with that, I'm going to pick a base model. I like to use the GPT 4.1 mini one. This one tends to be a good balance of speed and also quality. And it's also one of OpenAI's newer models. I'm going to save this prompt version, and then I'm going to run it. So what's happening now under the hood is each one of these tasks that we had with the source and machine translation is now being sent to the OpenAI model here with this instruction that I've provided it. And I'm getting a kind of view now of what the predictions from the LLM are on what the LLM thinks is a comment for the task or a rating for the task. And I can scroll through these to see, hey, like the LLM seems to think everything is pretty good. Which is probably not wrong because this is the data is from the Europar corpus and it's pretty accurate translations. But when you're testing your own data, this can be a good way to see if the LLM thinks that certain tasks have errors in it. So let's click into this one and see if see what the LLM said. All right. So now I have the same interface as before, but I could see that this annotation, or this prediction rather, came from this model. It came from the auto label prompt that I used the GPT 4.1 model for, and this is the kind of prediction that the LLM made. It highlighted this part as an error. It gave it a 4-star, and then it gave some comments on why it thinks the translation doesn't deserve a 5-star. If I agree or disagree with it, I can always modify it. And what's kind of interesting is if I have, let's say, like a benchmark or certain tasks that I know are correct and I want to mark as ground truth, I can also use those to evaluate the model against as well. So in this case, I didn't have any annotation to kind of compare the the LLM's translation evaluation against. But if I had like a ground truth task, I could compare the LLM's prediction against my ground truth task. So I'm going to quickly just set up how to do that. So how to create some ground truth. If you recall the first task that we annotated, I'm going to click into that first task on my data manager tab, and then I'm going to mark this one as ground truth. So in this case, I'm going to set ground truth from annotator Sheree. Okay. And so that task, I'm basically saying Sheree's annotation was correct. This is the correct annotation here. And I'm going to go back to my prompts page, re-click into that. And now I'll also see a new option of comparing LLM predictions against the ground truth. So I'm going to kind of run the same LLM as a judge, but this time I also have my ground truth that I had create to benchmark my LLM's predictions against. So I'm going to use the same GPT 4.1 mini. I'm going to get it to provide some predictions again, but this time I'm going to be able to compare the LLM's predictions side by side with my human assessment. So in this case, I see that there's quite a low score actually. Either the LLM is wrong or maybe the ground truth needs some correction. So this is a good way to identify how the LLM as a judge differs in its prediction against the human ground truth. So ideally, in the ideal scenario, you would have a set of tasks that would be your benchmark data set, and that would include all the ground truths that you want to evaluate different models against. And so in that case, you'd be able to have a lot of different ground truth options here, and you'd be able to see the prediction from the LLM against the kind of golden ground truth to see how your LLMs or your different LLMs perform against your golden data set. You get a final accuracy, a per task accuracy, and also some metrics on things like inference costs, so how much it costed you from the LLM side, and any, for example, like class distribution. If you get a lot of 5-star ratings, or maybe just one 5-star rating, you get like a distribution of how many of each class was identified and also how many errors were identified. Awesome. So that was quite quick. I think there are a lot of questions that were coming in. Anything that we can focus on? Or does anyone have any questions at this point that they wanted to speak up and jump in about?
I see a hand from Silvio, and then there's a couple in the chat that I want to address as well.
Totally.
Yes. So, yeah, this is great. So you have a rating from the ground truth here that says 4. The AI thought it was 5. What's the 6.5%?
That's a great
question. What does the score mean? Yeah.
So that's
because it's
basically
not like it's a 20% difference or 1 point on the scale. Where is that?
So that's the full agreement score, as if the model were an annotator and the human annotation is the correct annotation. So what we do is we compare for every category, we get the agreement score. So in this case, the rating would be a score of 0 because we're looking at just the agreements agree, and the scores do not agree, so they get a 0. I don't remember exactly how we calculate the comment scores. I don't remember if it's edit distance or something else. But either way, that's going to have a very low score as well because they don't agree. And so those two things then get averaged to create that score. If you go into your project settings, Sheree, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, if that's okay. If you go into your project settings and you go under, I believe it's quality, on the spot here, you can customize your agreement function. So right now we're using the basic matching function which is just the basic implemented function that we have. We have documentation on this on our website. But you could implement custom agreement. So if you wanted to change what your agreement functionality was based on some sort of scale, or if rating points want to be different on a scale, something like that, you could always customize that as well.
Okay,
Yeah.
got it. And the
Okay.
basic matching function means if they both are 5, they agree 100%. If they don't, then
Then they
something
agree
else.
0%. Exactly. Then they agree
They agree
0%.
zero.
Yeah.
Oh, very, very,
It's very basic. It's very
very
binary.
binary.
It's very
100
binary.
or 0. Okay, but I could create a custom that tells me, okay, there's a percentage of agreement between 4 and 5. They're closer than 1 and 5 or something like that.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
That answers another question in the chat. I do want to say, are
Thank
you
you.
planning to add more LLMs besides OpenAI? We actually already support a huge number of LLMs. The reason you only see OpenAI in your drop-down menu is because we provided OpenAI API keys for you for this demonstration. But if you have API keys for Gemini, Vertex AI, Anthropic, Azure, or even custom models that you're hosting anywhere you host your models, you can go ahead and provide the credentials for that, and you'll see those models populate in your drop-down menu. So that's why you only see OpenAI, but we do support many, many types of models there. There was also a question, can I double check the AI evaluation with another AI model, meaning agent 1 runs the evaluation, agent 2 with a different model, checks only strings that had 4 or less stars? The answer is basically yes. We did a webinar a while back that is available on our YouTube channel. I can try to find the link, although I don't think we have very much time, where Sheree and I talked about doing LLM as a judge in a very similar process. Essentially, what you'll do is you'll select a different base model here in your prompts menu from the drop-down menu. Then you can go ahead, run the evaluation, create them both as annotations, and then you'll get an agreement score between the two models, and you can see how each model performs. Sheree is currently looking for that webinar because she's the best. But I would recommend that you watch this How to Evaluate and Compare LLMs and Prompts in Label Studio webinar if you want answers to that question. That's like a whole in-depth topic in and of itself.
Oh yeah. I got the blog post. So in this blog post, I've got the
Amazing.
webinar attached and some screenshots. I'm going to link this to that workshop document that we have.
Amazing. And one last comment I wanted to make about prompts in general is that the prompt that you see on the left-hand side of the screen, I know Sheree is doing something, so we can't see it right now, is completely customizable. So it was pre-populated for you because this is a demo task, but you could write whatever prompt you want, and you could include whatever data you wanted to include in that prompt. So if you had extra metadata or context fields in your data set that you wanted to use, you could drag and drop them in there as well. You can write your prompt however you want it to be. So if you wanted to add context or things like that, that would be very easy to do here as well. You can also version them. So as you can see, Sherry's making a new version. So if we wanted to go ahead and change this prompt to just something very basic, we have the bad version of the prompt is what Sherry's called it. We can still access the better version of the prompt by using the drop-down menu at the top of the screen. I know we're basically at time. Elaine, I see your question about some of the features that Elena has mentioned. I would recommend that you email myself or Sheree. My email is just Micaela@humansignal.com, and Sheree's is Sheree@humansignal.com. Very easy to remember, and we would be more than happy to meet with you outside of this meeting and discuss that. You can also find us in the Label Studio Slack community, which is available on our website as well.
I will jump in and say that if you want to involve me as well, my email is also very very easy to remember. It's Elena@Custom.MT. So if anything, so if you have any more questions, any curiosity, I'm also available to chat.
All right, that's great. Thank you both.
And I think that is for a demo, who do we contact? I would contact our sales team. If you go into the demo link that you have, there I believe is a contact sales button somewhere on that form. If not, you could go to humansignal.com or labelstud.io is the open source website. And someone will reach out to you for a more complete demo or to answer any questions.
And same as before, if you want to contact me on our side, so for customers, same email as before, Elena@Custom.MT, but I think you already have enough Custom.MT contacts by now, seeing how many emails we have sent out lately. So reach out if you need something more kind of client-oriented.
Great. Yeah, she's a possum. Her name is Heidi. Our founder really likes possums, so we have a possum named Heidi. She's very cute. Any other last-minute questions? I know we're just about at time, and I think Sheree had a little recap she wanted to do, unless you want to skip that.
Can you guys give access to everybody to try it now? Can it be shared with the audience to just try annotating for a couple of minutes?
Sure, we dropped that link in the chat earlier today. I will go ahead and drop it in the chat again. This link will still work for a little while. I think most people, I think I saw up to 90 people in this document at one time, copying the link and setting up their trials, which is amazing. I've just dropped it back in the chat if you have more questions and want to play around with it. Yeah. So feel free to make your annotations, annotate a few samples, play around in the labeling config with our other types of projects. You can create new projects. I'm so glad to be hearing such awesome feedback. We hope that you use the tool, whether it be open source or one of our paid versions. And yeah, let us know if you have any feedback or what you're doing with your project. We'd love to hear about what you're working on.
Awesome. And yeah, just a reminder, we also have the open source edition. You can download the open source or try, again, you've tried the kind of starter cloud for free. And we also have a big Slack community as well if you wanted to reach out via Slack. So all that is labelstud.io, and all these links you can find in the hands-on workshop doc. So I'll continue adding resources here. But thank you all so much. This is awesome. Thanks so much for the feedback. I'll pass it on to the next presenter.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Micaela. Thanks, Elena.
Okay, so thank you, Sheree, Micaela, and Elena. So finally, we can close with a thought-provoking conversation, which will be led by Elena Murgolo from Custom.MT and Craig Stewart from Phrase. So their session is called Arbitration Practice in Human Evaluation, and followed by what if everything you're measuring is missing the point. So they will challenge us to reflect on the bigger picture of what we're really measuring in GenAI. So welcome to the stage, Elena.
Thank you. Yes, so actually what I wanted to talk about today was mentioned very quickly in the presentations before, which is the arbitration, or better said, the inter-annotator agreement problem that we face when we do the evaluations. I have a very quick slide deck that I wanted to show you to show you what arbitration means and what the inter-annotator agreement is. Let me see if I can share. Sorry, give me 1 second for sharing. I promise very quickly, so then if there are questions, we can just go to the question and make this a bit more interactive, which is always more fun. But just to give you an idea, so the first thing is, why do we need an inter-annotator agreement that we have mentioned before, in case, I mean, I think most people here know this, but just in case, so basically the inter-annotator agreement is an evaluation of how reliable the outcome of the evaluations are. So somebody did mention kappa. This is one of the possibility to evaluate the inter-annotator agreement. There are other possibilities. And basically, what you need to do in the end of the evaluation is understand if your raters, your evaluators, in this case your linguists, for instance, agree with each other. Because if they don't, then you don't really know who is right, unless you can evaluate yourselves, of course. But imagine you get an evaluation for a language that you don't speak. There is no way for you to judge who is right and who is wrong. So you need to trust your evaluators, which of course speak a lot about choosing the right evaluators, choosing the right LLM in case you want to use that. But in the end, if you have two or more people that agree with each other, of course, that's where you want to go. When you have very complicated methods of evaluation like MQM, DQF, and such, so the higher the level of complication in the evaluation is, the more improbable the agreement is going to be. So, for instance, in this case, what we can judge is the full agreement. So you have, let's say, two evaluators, to make this very easy. Two evaluators, they agree, it's agreement. They disagree, it's agreement. So agreement means that both raters, in the example that we did before with Sheree, they agree on both how many stars the segments receives and where the error is, or what kind of errors they find in the segments. And as you can see, the agreement is very low. If they disagree only on the stars, but say mark the same error, that's still disagreement. And this is basically what the kappa does, since somebody mentioned. The kappa, if they agree, good, it's calculated as agreement. If they don't agree on a part of it, then it's a disagreement. A second possibility would be to kind of make an in-between solution, right? So a partial agreement, a measurement. So either they agree completely, they agree on stars, they agree on errors, or they agree on stars or on errors. So they gave the same number of stars, or they rate the same type of error. In which case, we count as partial agreement. Of course, partial agreement can be measured depending on what the client thinks or what the end consumer of this evaluation think it's more important. If they think that the rating, so the stars is more important because it gives an overall view of the quality of the machine translation, you will count that as agreement. If they think that error is more important, you will calculate the error type as agreement. So I want to know if there is terminology error, if there are terminology errors in this text, that counts as partial agreement. When the raters don't agree on either, then you have, of course, a disagreement. As you can see, if you do calculate partial agreement, the same kind of evaluation have a much higher agreement rates overall. If you're still not completely comfortable with this scenario, so you say, okay, but I really want full agreement on everything, and you only have two people, so they have already said what they think of the machine translation. In this case, it's a machine translation evaluation, of course, but it can be any kind of evaluation. What you want to do is find an arbitrator. So you get a third person involved that can either agree with the first person, agree with the second person, or agree with the LLM, or agree with the person, or disagree with both. In which case, it becomes a full agreement, so majority agreement, let's say. So linguist 3, let's say, agrees with linguist 1. Even if linguist 2 didn't agree, it's a minority report, as they say. So this counts as the majority wins, it's full agreement. The third person can also agree or disagree in the case where the two people were completely unaligned. So the first person said 5 stars, the other said 1 star. And they also disagreed on the amount and on the type of errors that they found in the segment. But the third person agreed with the 5 star. So that counts also as agreement. And in this scenario, as you can see, the disagreement is further reduced. So if we compare the three, let's say the 3 scenarios, the first one would be either they agree in full or they disagree. Then you have the in-between solution with the partial agreement, where you have, okay, full agreement and disagreement, but also, okay, we are more or less aligned on this. And finally, of course, you have the arbitrator, so involving somebody that can say who's right, basically. What we usually do is suggest to have at least three evaluators, because of course you should theoretically have at least two thinking more or less the same thing. Or the second possibility is, however, having two evaluators in the first run, and then an arbitrator selecting the one that they think is right. So this was kind of a very quick overview on what we usually discuss about arbitration and inter-annotator agreement. That was mostly what I had to show you today. But if you have any kind of questions, Silvio, I see you very actively involved in this. Let's go.
Oh, I had so many questions, but
Okay.
the first thing I want to ask you is about the inter-annotator agreement. It can be a percentage, right? So because I use Kappa in the past, it's very punitive. It makes the score go down very badly for everything. And then I looked at percentage. So if you have three annotators, 2 versus 1 is 66%. All three agree is 100%. Much more intuitive, and still tells you everything. Is that okay?
Yes, so the percentages that you have seen in my presentation were the percentages of segments within a data set where I had some kind of agreement, right? So I had 70% of the, I don't remember the numbers, but let's say 70% of the total amount of segments where I have at least two people saying the same thing, right? I agree with you. So the kappa is very hard to use, and it's also very hard from our part to present to a client because it's a simple number that doesn't say much unless you really understand what a kappa is. We're actually working on making it more adaptable, but it's still a number. So there needs to be some, how can I say, preparation for the final user to understand what they are reading. Percentages are more
intuitive.
Yes, thanks.
Okay. So yeah, and the other question is, you're combining stars and errors. Then shouldn't you just do the stars? The errors are very hard to match. So if you ask two people to classify the same error for the same words in a sentence, your probability of disagreement is super high. People are not going to agree. So it looks to me like the stars are more, well, yeah, represent better what they're thinking. There's a more reasonable chance of agreeing on stars. Is that fair?
Yes. However, it depends on what your final aim is. So if you really want to know what your model is getting wrong, the stars will not tell you that. So it might be more useful for you to say, to explain very well the error types and to maybe limit the number of error types that you give to the linguist, but give them the type of errors that they should find. So you need to, for instance, you are trying a new machine translation or a new LLM for translation or for whatever reason, right? And you want to know if the translation that it's providing have a terminology errors in them, in which case you can simply put in some kind of glossary and that's it. Or if what they are producing can be actually insulting for the audience, in which case a glossary is not enough, right? You need to do something else. In that sense, star might not be enough. And even stars might be very subjective in the sense that, is it really insulting? Yes. For one, yes, 1 star. For the other, not so much, 4 stars, right? So it really depends on the final output. But of course, that is why we also use Label Studio very often, because it's very customizable. So we can decide project by project where we want to go, right? If we only want stars, if we want 5 stars, if we want 10 stars, if we want 4 stars, if we want 100 errors or 2. it's kind of the preemptive discussion with the client.
Thank you, Elena.
Thank you. I don't know if we have any other questions. I'm sorry, I'm not very good at following chats when I'm talking.
I do have a question. I'm sorry, I can't find the raise hand thing. Very quickly, whenever the disagreement is not very obvious, like say you have a critical mistranslation, but when the disagreement is kind of partial, when would you send something for arbitration? Is there a percentage that you use as a benchmark? Oh, if it's above 60%, I send it for arbitration, and if not, not?
So as we mentioned, evaluation is technically very expensive. So there are different considerations there. So first is the budget. Do we have budget for arbitration, or we just get what we get? If we have multiple languages, we take the 2-3 languages that have a lowest interannotator agreement, and then we send maybe those. If we have just a few languages, it's not, there's no definitive threshold, right? So you kind of judge how it went. So you look at the partial agreement and the full agreement. If you have a very high full agreement and a very low partial agreement, then that could be still acceptable. If you have a very low full agreement and a very high partial agreement, then maybe you still want an arbitrator in the mix. So it's very case by case. Yeah, that's it. No worries. Anyone else? If anyone who is writing in the chat wants to take the word, because it will take a while for me to read everything.
There was a comment like, what about 2 human evaluators and 1 AI? What do you
Yes.
think?
Interesting. Where do you put the AI though? Is the AI the arbitrator? Is the AI one of the evaluators and then the arbitrator? It's interesting. It's one of the possibilities, of course. One of the evaluators, I think that's the that's the person who asked before. So one evaluator is the LLM, the other evaluator is a human, and then you have a human arbitrator. Possible? Why not? Let's say the one thing that I would do is not tell the arbitrator which one was the AI to avoid biases in that sense. So you just put him in front of 2 evaluations and say, who is right? And then that would be interesting to see how much the human evaluator scores, so agrees with the arbitrator, and how much the AI agrees with the arbitrator. We have not had this case yet, not in real life projects, only in like R&D. So I'm not sure. I don't have data to support my curiosity at this point. Silvio?
Okay, so just one more question. You could have 3 evaluators, 3 different AIs, and see how they agree with each other. Have you tried that?
We have not tried it. Technically, you can have anything you want and as perverse as you want. You could have 2 humans and then the AI evaluating who is right. You could also tell the human, hey, the AI agreed with you, and then he either cries or is very happy or never works with you again. That could also be an interesting test. No, we have not that. Sorry, this was going off topic. No, we haven't had that yet. I think I'm eating up all the space now, so I possibly need to switch over to the next speaker. I'm sorry about this.
No. Thanks, Elena. Can I get a time check though? How much time do I have? Do I have just 9 minutes? Are you going to make me present in 9 minutes, or do I have a bit longer?
No, we have time. Yeah, don't worry. Thank you, Elena.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I love hearing conversations about interannotator agreement, because that is my entire world, especially on the, so I work on the tech side of things, where we're training the AIs, and all of that disagreement with annotators feeds into the power of the models, right? That's all noise in the training data for us. Super exciting stuff. But let me kick in. So I am Craig Stewart. I'm the Director of AI Research at Phrase, and I'm going to take everything that you heard about evaluation and try to tip it over for you a little bit. Not in a, hopefully in a meaningful way. I'm not trying to be provocative, but there is something of a trend at the moment of a shift towards this broader content context, right? Is that a lot of what we're doing in localization exists within this broader context of content generation, right? Whether that be marketing content, documentation, other things. And what I want to try and do is take a look at the automated evaluation side. And now that we have LLMs in the mix, doing some of the generation of the content, some of the translation of content, see how that's affecting our perception on evaluation and the things that we try to evaluate, and how, at least I think, that we should change that. So I mentioned that I'm a bit of a nerd for evaluation. My background is in automated evaluation. I was one of the architects of the Custom.MT evaluation metric. So I spend all my time thinking about this problem. So I'll walk you through current practices and technology and methodology and what we're doing at the moment, a little bit of how LLMs are changing the game, and then talk a little bit about what I see as outcome-based evaluation and how we might want to change our mindset moving into this broader context of the content world, and hopefully some recommendations that you can take home and try at home as well. To kick off with, there's a couple of different pieces of technology or groups of technology that I want to highlight to give you the context of what I'm saying. One of these is quality estimation. So quality estimation is a little bit newer. People have been toying with this for the last few years in particular, and usually it's used in automation of localization workflows where we're trying to kind of optimize, right, and decide whether content is good enough, whatever we think that means, to be sent out the door or to be post-edited or something else. And these systems are usually neural based. I made one of the Comet QE system is one of them. Phrase has a QPS system, and Babel has its MQM-QE. There's a lot of them around, but they're mostly segment-based. So they're mostly looking at a single segment at a time and giving it a score, right? To some degree, trying to replicate what Elena was just describing as the annotation process and providing a score that tells you how good the translation is. Most of them are neural, so they're very scalable. They're really attractive to big enterprises because they can be used everywhere, and you can throw QPS scores and MQM scores and quality estimation scores everywhere, which is really, really cool. They have limitations that I'll talk about in a minute. Another family of technology is the automated metrics, Comet being one of these, Blue being another very famous one. And what you're doing here is using a reference translation or a post-edited translation to try to decide which of the two machine translations that systems that you're training should be deployed, for example. So you have a test set of reference data, and you apply this automated metric to decide which MT system you think is better. Again, these are reference dependent, so they have to have a reference translation to work, and they operate at a segment level as well. And that gives them certain limitations. Now we're moving, and Elena was already hinting at the AI judges of translation quality, right? The AI-based annotators. This is kind of a new realm for us. We've got some experimentation that we're doing at Phrase in this realm. But you look at LLM judges, agents, or LLM-based annotators, all of these things, and usually they're either MQM or PE-based potentially. They're a little bit more context aware, so you can give them more stuff to look at, and they're a bit more aware of the surrounding context. And they can be adapted quite easily. So they're a very attractive alternative solution. The trouble is they're not very scalable. So they can't be used at the same scale as a QE system can be used. And they have their own limitations as well. Some of the key limitations of these systems. Number one, for the segment-based systems, they don't have a lot of context. So you give them a single segment, they have no idea what came before. And that's critical when you think about the types of errors that you see at a document level, right? It can be gender consistency, brand consistency, style consistency, those kinds of things that can get missed by these types of systems, which is a problem, right? Especially if you're using them in routing decisions, deciding what documents or jobs need post-editing or not. If the system isn't aware of context, there's some stuff that's being missed there, some nuance that's being missed. Usually, unless you've trained a system specifically on a customer's terminology, they're a little bit ignorant of customer-specific terminology, right? If there's specific product names or brand terminology or things like that that you want to feed into the translation, they're not very good at that. They're not very aware of other constraints as well, things like maybe specific locale nuances, conventions like date formats, things like that, and character limits that the customer has. They don't really know about any of that. And they're also really good at, for the most part, looking at linguistic quality, but not very good at considering stylistic variation and things like that. If you have a piece of content that's for a particular market and has to have a particular style to it, QE system's not really going to help you. And that's important in today's world, in particular with LLMs, because LLMs are driving at a little bit more at fitness for purpose. So when we're using LLMs to do adaptation, transcreation, translation of content, what we're finding is that we're able to now widen the opportunity space and drive a little bit more at fitness for purpose, because fitness for purpose, and I love talking about this, is really the end goal of what we're trying to do, right? Is when we're creating content and we're translating content and we're trying to create this user experience in a target culture, in a target language that is parallel to the source language experience, right? If it's an English product, we're trying to give the people in Japan a directly comparable customer experience with the content that we produce and translate, right? That's what we're trying to do. That's why fitness for purpose is so important, because all of the cultural nuance around that locale has to be included, it has to form part of the end user experience. And that, all of that at the even broader level, and this is the context of this presentation, is driving engagement. That's what we're trying to do, right? For many of the big enterprise customers of Phrase, it's all about the products or the services that they sell and the amount of engagement that the end user has, that end user experience. Are they actually buying the product that we're trying to sell them with the content that we're producing or translating? And that is all tied into key business objectives. And one of the things that I hear when I talk to localization teams is the pain that they have in trying to communicate the value of what they do, because they don't use the same language as the executives downstream who think about these business KPIs, right? So that's part of what I'm going to say today. LLMs have really messed things up for us a little bit, especially for me on the tech side, because it becomes very exciting and very difficult to keep up. But we are sort of seeing a bit of a trend moving away from traditional neural machine translation and PE workflows, right? Where we previously had segment level translation and then some post-editing that's done on top of the job to fix it all up, right? We can now use LLMs to do not just the translation, but post-editing as well. There's systems that are doing adaptation of content and all sorts of wonderful transformation of content, because they're very, very creative. They can create very, very high quality and high impact multilingual experiences. And to some degree, from some of the conversations I have with localization teams, I see this happening not just within the localization teams themselves, but also outside. We've got content marketing teams, documentation teams doing this themselves and trying to use multilingual content generation to start generating content in other languages and almost bypassing the localization team entirely, right? So that kind of thing is starting to happen in different ways in different places to different degrees. But again, what we're trying to do, and the reason LLMs are attractive, is because they can help us to create this culturally and linguistically resonant experience for the end user. They're also very highly non-deterministic, right? If you put something into ChatGPT and you press it twice, you'll get two different outputs. That's changing the game for us a little bit because of the fact that with neural machine translation systems, you just got one translation that you had to worry about and evaluate, right? You take one translation from a machine translation system, you send it for human review, and you get a result. Now, if you're using LLMs or to do translation or adaptation or transcreation or whatever you're doing with them, you can come up with, if you really are that way inclined, 100 different options for translations, right? You could do that. You can just generate a bunch of them at the same time. And that has an impact on the way in which we start to think about evaluation, because this is not just singular segments that we're using a QE score for, right? We're no longer dealing with that singular output of a machine translation system. We're dealing with all sorts of different things and options, almost infinite variations on text, and that's important. So the question I have for you today, and on the back of the previous presentation about annotation and things, linguistic quality. I mean, this has always been the case, right? We've always talked about like linguistic quality and fitness for purpose being like this end goal. And one of the reasons from Elena's presentation that annotation is so difficult is because some of the linguistic quality stuff is totally objective. Super easy to find a grammatical error in a piece of content. But to identify that the customer has a particular stylistic constraint that they wanted implemented that hasn't been implemented, that's really tricky and subjective, right? And much, much harder to nail down. And that's where disagreement happens. So my question for this group is then, is linguistic quality still the only thing we should be worried about? Or are there other downstream things and the bigger picture that we should start thinking about. Here's a thing for you about why I think the automated evaluation system isn't quite on point at the moment, right? We have the generic automated metrics, things like Comet and the QE systems and things like that. So they don't tell us anything about whether or not we've actually met the goal that we were trying to achieve downstream, right? Customer engagement downstream, CSAT scores, engagement metrics, click-through rates, all of those things that content teams in particular are measuring, business metrics. The QE score that we get when we get a translation doesn't tell us anything about that downstream. All it tells us is some sort of partially nuanced measure of linguistic quality, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that is missed by the metric. It doesn't tell us anything about the document level consistency. I've covered that already. Like the segment level curse is one that affects us deeply. We need to start thinking about the document level context, which is why human evaluation is still so prevalent, because humans have the benefit of the context, right? And then terminology adherence and things like that as well. And anything about the style or intended audience. And I don't know to which degree, anyone listening has experience in trying to kind of really branch out on the translation space and do really cool and different things. But we do have customers at Phrase who are intentionally trying to take a piece of source content and translate it in two very different directions, right? For two very different demographics. They want to start trying to fork content. A lot of that depends on where your team sits within the broader content flow. Maybe you're very closely integrated with your content teams and you work very closely with them, or maybe you're isolated as more of a kind of compliance team that the content teams have to get through to get content multilingually out the door. But that's one consideration, right? Is that there is this style and intended audience that is a bit of an end goal for us. Term-aware automated metrics, this is sort of happening now. There's, especially with the LLMs, there's a bit more terminology-aware technology that's coming to the surface, which is great. Then, of course, there's the LLM judges and the LQA systems, right? The LLMs that are doing the work of annotating and things like that. What I'm promoting today, and this is not something I've solved, but it's just a thought to kind of put on the table for you, is that we start thinking about more outcome-aware methods of evaluation, right? Start thinking about the downstream engagement metrics and solutions. Specifically, that we broaden the focus of our evaluations when we're looking at the translation. Think about other signals and KPIs that we can connect to, particularly within the context of the business in which we're operating. What does your business measure when it's putting content out the door? What are the kind of metrics that they're looking at? How are they measuring the impact and engagement of that content? Which of the engagement metrics matter? Maybe you have a website and you're worried about like the click-through rate or the bounce rate or something like that. Maybe you're sending out marketing emails and you're worried about conversion rate. When I say you, I mean your business, but this is something you can worry about too. And how do we measure the idea of impact and resonance? How do we know that the content that we translated actually resonated with the end user? And there are some existing metrics to that. I've mentioned some of them here, but it's really on you to go find out what these things are, I think, within the context of what you're doing. So to quickly wrap it up, and then I'll take questions. Couple of recommendations for this new kind of outcome-aware thinking around evaluation. Look at KPIs, key business indicators that you're working within the space. Go talk to your content team about how they're measuring the impact and engagement on content that they're putting out in the source language, whether that be English or something else. Work with them to understand what that could look like in a localization space, and recognize that with LLMs now, you have lots more options than you started with, right? You're not just looking at a singular output. You potentially do lots of different things. And then the other thing, and this is really a high-level suggestion, A/B testing is very useful here. And this is not something that I have personally tested on the content end, but something I've been talking to customers about. In particular, the idea that now we have the opportunity to generate lots of different versions of content, lots of different versions of translations, test them in the wild, test them in real time, test them in the content flow, in the broader content flow. Whereas MT engines and QE models give us that singular output, we can get a bunch of different variants from the translation with LLMs and adaptation with LLMs and things like that. Test them in action, like put out 2 versions of an Italian piece of content and see which one drives engagement more in whatever way that your business is measuring that. So those are the 2 recommendations. Quickly to summarize, looking at accuracy, pure linguistic accuracy is the easiest thing that we can do but it's not enough because it's not close enough to the downstream goals. LLMs have now made us kind of broaden our focus a little bit. There's been lots of discussion over the past day or so of this type of shift of focus towards the broader content stream. And it's important that we start to think about how that changes the way in which we do things. So just broaden the metrics that you use, right? Not necessarily just using the QE scores, but think about other engagement metrics as well. Test and iterate. A/B testing is one idea, but there may be others, but experiment with that. And really, just to wrap it up, we're very good at asking, is it linguistically accurate? That's very easy, and that's something we're very good at doing. But also starting to think about, does it resonate? How do we get at that question? How do we start to answer that with more meaningful metrics, KPIs, and evaluation methodology? That's what I have. Thank you. Quick note, I know that was a quick run through, but if anybody has experimented with this, anybody has any thoughts on this beyond the scope of the question space we have now, please email. I'm super passionate to talk about this and love talking about evaluation in general, so very happy to hear. Any thoughts? Look at the chat.
I have a question, Craig. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
So I don't know that much about how to get, the end user and so forth, their feedback, but in general, I was more curious about phrase and, what are you looking at in terms of, future evaluations that could be more document level or even phrase level? How can that actually be incorporated into the tool set? That's really the challenge, right? That we seem to have to do everything outside of the tools right now in order to use the document level power, I guess, of LLMs.
Yes.
And is that something that you guys are working on? Maybe already doing it? It would be great to know more.
There's a push from two different directions. One of them is on the technology side. So at the moment, we're working on, especially our translation solutions operate now at a document level. We're also pushing our evaluation methodologies to operate at document level and start addressing some of those constraints of the segment level systems from that end and pushing the technology towards that space. Also doing things like trying to understand from a customer perspective, what are the clues that drive engagement? What are the pieces of the style guide that we should pay attention to that we know will drive engagement for the customer, and focusing on those and hyper-focusing those through profiling that allows us to capture that more in the technology side of things. The other side of things is on the customer end, and we're having lots of conversations with bigger enterprise customers who are starting to realize that they need to put those types of metrics in the workflow, in the platform, and try to understand how we can accommodate that within the phrase platform in particular to get at more predictive methodology, right? Is that I'd love to be able to produce a QE model that can predict click-through rate at downstream or something like that. That would be really cool. But, yeah.
Greg, I have a quick question, if I may, Stefan Yui here. One of the things I'm passionate about is the opportunities for the language industry to break out of the translation box, so to speak. Not that there's anything wrong with the translation box, but I think there's so much more opportunity for localization to have a bigger impact upstream and shift left. Wouldn't the outcome-based ideas that you are touching upon right now be an ideal vehicle for that? And what is phrase doing in that sense to accommodate that?
So you're very right. Please, if you get a chance, email me afterwards. I would love to chat to you, because the sentiment behind this presentation is exactly that. It's exactly about encouraging momentum to move outside of this translation box that we're currently in. Translation is a piece of the puzzle. What I mentioned before is that I'm really passionate about is providing the context of the parallel experience, right? The way I see that what we're doing in localization is trying to generate an experience and a target culture that matches the source experience, not just in terms of language. Language is just one dimension of that experience. And trying to get outside of that translation box, as you put it, right? And try to think about that experience in broader terms is super important. I already mentioned a couple of the ways that phrase that we're thinking about that, and a lot of it relates to capturing customer expectation, what it is that represents that customer experience to them, and how we can represent that in the platform through things like profiling, content expectation, stylistic expectation, and that kind of thing. But yeah, you're very much on point, and I think that that's exactly the momentum that we need to to move to the next stage of what localization should be.
Awesome. I will drop you a note after the presentation. Thank you so much.
Cool. Thank you. More questions?
Hey, Craig. Yeah, I think I have more like a thought than a question. I just graduated from MIS, and yeah, it's a weird time to living, especially in the midst of like everybody's talking about we're switching away from the simper word model, and I feel like it's a long journey, and it can vary a lot. Like the estimation, the quality standard, the proposed like the future of QE will vary a lot on use cases.
Definitely.
And yeah, and it will take a lot of that use cases to be able to kind of spot a pattern and then to essentially make a product out of it. And that will be a whole another service that's more like consultation rather than quality estimation.
Yes. You're hinting at something very important there around the use cases piece as well. And that's actually really a cornerstone of this, right? Is that this doesn't apply everywhere. There's plenty of content, plenty of like, you think about user generated content, for example, when raw machine translation is still probably fine, right? We don't need to worry about engagement metrics. This is more focused on the kind of the higher end. And it's really motivated by that kind of directionality of large language models at the moment that are pushing into that space, right? Is they're pushing into the more creative space, marketing content, that kind of thing. So it's, yeah, you're exactly on point. Like there is different perspectives for different use cases. But yeah, congratulations on graduating as well.
Oh, thank you.
Nice.
And I'll
Welcome to
definitely
this.
email you like a thesis.
Yeah.
I'm nerding out on this as well.
Yeah, me too. Don't worry, it's fine. And it's I empathize as well because, you know, thinking about like Comet, right? We came up with Comet and thinking that was the thing to solve it all, and now I'm basically telling you that no, I've
like
not solved
everything's
it at
gone.
all. It's yeah, exactly. Cool. There's a couple of hands up. I see Walid. Do you want to?
Yeah, hi. Thank you everyone for this amazing event. Yeah, just I actually had the same point is this type of, which is a trend now, looking at the whole and looking at also how we can use that evaluation might not be a fit for every case. So there are situations where linguistic quality is more important than usability or whatever you were going to use. But I was just going to say, I'm also a student at MIS, just my first year, but I have another role where I work in language services in a hospital. And one of the projects I'm involved in is testing using, AI engines to translate some medical records, not to use them as a basic of taking any decision, but for triage purposes for international patients. They send their records in another language. We can't decide whether we can take them or not. And one of the criteria when we did is how the doctors would look at it and said, can this translation is enough for me to take a decision? That is, I can take this patient, let them come here or not. And that's the use case where, yeah, we don't care about if it's going to be perfect or not, because we will not use it to deliver care, but we will just make a decision. And it's a low risk. Even if they make a mistake, they're going to come here, maybe they can decide, oh, nothing to do for you, sorry. But it is a situation where that's more important than the linguistic quality.
Yeah, exactly. That segmentation of use cases is really important. There are definitely lots of use cases. And actually, you mentioned the word risk, and that's a big part of it too, right? Is understanding the risk of the content that you're trying to translate. And sometimes machine translation is entirely appropriate. So yeah, that's very true. Great. Paula. Hi, Paula.
Hi, Craig. Hi. Sorry, for the no camera. I don't feel like
it's okay. I know what you look like. It's fine.
So I loved your presentation. I have a lot of thoughts. Actually, we are trying to do this at Booking through experimentation and try to measure more what quality means for the customer, right? Through these business metrics. But the thing is that the metrics are owned by the business, right? So by the product teams and not by localization. So what we're trying to do is actually to get closer to them or be more like strategic partners with them on this. But I was wondering if you have any advice or like, I don't know, I trust your instincts, but
Yeah.
in the sense of any recommendations for an industry who's been measuring linguistic quality with MQM for so many years, and like just for us to wake up and say we have to move away from an accuracy minor error and try to identify what matters for the customer more. And the business metrics could be any, it could be like scroll depths or conversion, I don't know, whatever. But we don't even know what those are because each product team measures them differently and they measure different things that are important to them. But they don't necessarily match what we measure usually for localization or linguistic quality. They don't even know. So yeah, I was just wanted to pick your brain a little bit more on that.
No, I think this is great. And you're hinting at, a bit of a missing piece of the puzzle here, right? And that's one of the things on my mind as well, is until we have conversations with customers that want to share these types of metrics, there's little I can do on the tech side to do things like predict them downstream, right? Is that getting access to those metrics is one part of the challenge. So the one thing that I think about often is that, and I hear this when I talk to localization teams who complain that their content teams are just going ahead and just trying to use ChatGPT to do the translation themselves and just skipping localization entirely. And the one thing I always wonder about is like, how can we, as a community, communicate risk better? Because that has disastrous potential, right? I mean, that legally, depending on the nature of the content, of course, and depending on the risk profile of the whatever it is that we're trying to do, like there's significant risk in doing that, especially when you target cultures with specific sensitivities around certain things, right? Is that, if you don't do it properly, if you don't include localization in that workflow, you can land yourself in some real problems. And trying to find a way that we can communicate that better, not just through MQM, which is something, and I think, as a community, we've been very good at developing all of these different evaluation methodologies that make sense to us, but don't make sense to anybody else. And I think that's where we're kind of stuck at the moment. So the sooner we start thinking, and on the back of this presentation, the sooner we start thinking in terms of the metrics downstream that matter, even if it's kind of hard to get at them at the moment, if we can start communicating that we understand the impact on engagement and we start measuring that internally and saying, okay, don't worry about MQM, we'll worry about that. But the risk here is that engagement on this piece of content in the Japanese market will cause that, we won't be able to sell that product. It'll cause too much of an issue or something like that. Trying to, start experimenting with the metrics and demonstrate that we understand the impact downstream, I think is a reasonable first step. But beyond that, there's a big piece of the puzzle there that's missing.
Thank you, Craig. This is really helpful already. Thank you.
I also have a comment on that because I work at an LSP called Blend, and we implemented quality estimation on our workflow, but we also kept the human in the loop even for the out of approved segments. So that's also a possible solution to have lower
I mean,
risk.
human in the loop is always the optimal solution, right? The unfortunate thing about it is it's not always scalable, right? Is that especially now we're in the world of LLMs where people are generating content left, right, and center. It's really hard to do that for every piece of content. So that's the biggest challenge of human in the loop. Is, of course, you sit someone down with a style guide. That's probably your best bet at the moment. But to do that at scale is really, really difficult. But yeah, absolutely, that's one way to do it. Yeah, I've seen people trying to put like QE systems in a loop with LLM-based transcreation systems, and it's like, no, that's not going to work because the QE system won't understand the stylistic nuance. But another conversation for another day.
I suppose one KPI could be usability. I've done evaluation based on usability really for maybe user-generated content, before starting working in technology, I was a quality manager, which is great. It's great training. And with the big account I was working on, we were already doing some sort of kind of end user evaluations of the content we were localizing, because the amount of time and money that is spent in quality that is literally unnecessary, it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
So I am all for other KPIs as well as quality. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, the harsh reality is, as much as money as we spend on getting the linguistic quality right, is that sometimes downstream those punctuation errors don't really make much of a difference to engagement. It's more about the style of the output. So yeah,
or if
definitely.
it's like, I mean, can I buy this thing, right?
Exactly.
Do I have can I go to that restaurant and I understand, you know, that they are okay or whatever it is? Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Great. I've eaten up so much time. I hope that was okay. I would love to, again, the emails there, please email and continue the conversation. Thanks.
Okay, so if we don't have any more questions, we can wrap this up. So yeah, we had very fascinating discussions. I feel very inspired, and especially about the relationships between LLM and translation quality. So clearly there's some excitement and some challenges ahead, especially around the evaluation frameworks and also maintaining quality standards. So thank you so much, everyone, for your valuable insights and for your participation. And I also look forward to continuing these discussions.
No, thank you to you, Carmen. Well done. Today you maintained the room. We had a very hard material, very strong material in the beginning, then hands-on, and now Craig and Elena provoking us. So thank you very much for maintaining the ambience. I can see that my DUI project has already arrived. Have a good evening and see you tomorrow.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, thanks.